Jin Yue's neck is already wrapped in darkness, and the sigil forming beneath her skin isn't meant to kill. It's meant to make her wish it had. Yun Qi promised not to cripple her, but he never said anything about leaving her whole. Leave a like and subscribe to see what takes shape when mercy runs out. Mei-yin let out a startled cry as she unconsciously took a step forward, but she didn't end up intervening this time. Since Yun Qi had already said that he wouldn't kill or cripple Jin Yue, she knew that he wouldn't go back on his word. Jin Yue's face had lost all of its color. She couldn't speak or even struggle, and her eyes grew dimmer with each passing second. Yun Qi's eyes were ice cold as darkness seeped out of his hand and began to spread from Jin Yue's neck to her solar plexus and lower abdomen. The darkness swiftly pooled in those two locations before forming a dark sigil about the size of a grown man's palm. As he stared at the dark mark that he had left on her body, he coldly said, "Are you filled with shame right now? Then let that shame carve itself into your very soul so that you'll never ever forget this moment." His family had died, so how could he simply let these people off just like that? After he finished speaking, he loosened his grip on Jin Yue's neck and casually pushed her aside. Jin Yue fell heavily on the ground and immediately curled up into a fetal position. She panickedly conjured up a layer of moonlight to cover up the jade body that had been defiled by devilish power. But she would never be able to hide the shame that had been carved into her very soul. "Listen up, you'd better leave this black sigil exactly where I put it. Don't ever think of trying to get rid of it. If I ever sense its existence disappearing, I will come back and annihilate your entire clan." Yun Qi hadn't only used his darkness profound energy to create this black sigil, he had also used a bit of his soul power. Therefore, he would be able to sense Jin Yue's location as long as the mark remained. In other words, this also meant that she would always be under Yun Qi's watchful eye, and she could forget about ever taking any rash actions against him, even though she had never once thought of doing anything against Yun Qi in the first place. This is already the greatest forgiveness and grace that I can give you. As a casual aside, I'll bestow upon you one more piece of advice. You should forget about ever getting a man in this lifetime, because if they see this dark sigil that I have personally blessed you with, tusk. As Shui Mei-yin stood behind Yun Qi, she sensed that dark malice flaring up from him once more. Her delicate head drooped as she quietly bit down hard on her lower lip. Cough, cough, cough. Jin Yue gingerly held her snowy neck as she was seized by a fit of violent coughing, but she didn't say a single word after that. Her other hand was quietly planted on a piece of dirt behind her. She was holding something very small in her hand, and she was holding onto it very tightly, as if she was terrified that Yun Qi would see it. Unfortunately for her, Yun Qi had already caught sight of it the moment it fell from her body. It was a very small bronze mirror that couldn't be any more ordinary. Xia Qingyu had once worn it around her neck because it was something that Yue Wugu had left to her. Back then, Yun Qi had been so curious about it that he had even asked her about it, and he had even opened it once. A profound image was engraved in that bronze mirror. In the picture was a young Xia Hongyi and Xia Yuanba and Xia Qingyu when they were only 3 and 4 years old, respectively. "Why is this bronze mirror with you?" Yun Qi asked with slightly narrowed eyes. He had asked the question in a very casual manner, and it was clear that he didn't really care what the answer was. A divine profound practitioner normally carried their important items in a spatial ring or in their own personal spatial pocket. But Jin Yue had actually been wearing this bronze mirror. It was clear to see that she still possessed a deep reverence and affection for Xia Qingyu, even in spite of her cruel banishment. Jin Yue's entire body instantly went rigid. She gripped the bronze mirror even tighter, but she did not dare to answer that question. In the end, she replied in a soft and tremulous voice, "Master tasked me with destroying it. I was afraid that Master might regret it one day, so I secretly kept it without telling her." Now, it was the only thing she had to remember Xia Qingyu by. "Then you should keep it properly, and I hope that that woman's possessions won't bring you too much misfortune in the future," Yun Qi said in a derisive voice. "What are you still doing here?" Shui Mei-yin said. Once she knew that Yun Qi wouldn't try to seize or destroy the bronze mirror in her hand, the stiffness went out of Jin Yue's body. She slowly got to her feet and changed into another set of blue robes before she picked up the unconscious wire and swiftly flew off into the distance. When she left, her eyes did not contain any hatred or shame. Instead, they were filled with a dispirited brokenness and a quiet sorrow. Being able to serve Xia Qingyu would always be the greatest pride and joy of her life. However, she had also suffered this great humiliation because she had once served Xia Qingyu. What was even more complicated was that this great humiliation was practically a boon that the goddess Meiyin had managed to secure on her behalf. As she flew through the night sky, drops of heart-rending starlight fell from her beautiful eyes. She did not know whether the events of today would be a form of release or the beginning of a never-ending nightmare. Now that Xianxia was done with his business, he let out a small sigh. When he turned around, his eyes had become warm and gentle once more. "Big brother Xianxia, thank you," Shui Meiyin said in a soft and gentle voice. Xianxia shook his head and said, "Then, in regards to what you wanted to tell me today, have you thought things through?" "Yes, I have," Shui Meiyin said as she vigorously nodded her head. After that, she laughed and said, "I've decided that I will tell you after we've beaten the Dragon God realm. However, I can tell you this right now. It's something wonderful. In fact, it should be a very happy surprise for you." "Okay." Xianxia decided not to pursue the topic any further. "For the sake of this happy surprise, I will definitely smash the Dragon God realm flat." "Then let's go back to the 10 Directions Deep Sea realm," Shui Meiyin said as she stepped forward and grabbed his arm. "We didn't bring those 3 strange grandfathers with us this time. If we don't return soon, both them and the Devil Queen will start to worry about us." "Yeah." Xianxia looked in the direction that Jin Yue had left. "But before we leave, let me make sure that there aren't any other fish swimming out there. Since Jin Yue is here, there might very well be other people from the Moon God realm as well." After he finished speaking, he released his divine senses and swiftly started scanning the entire star realm. When they had first reached the 7-star realm, he had only done a casual sweep of the auras on the 7-star realm. But right now, he was using his divine senses to carefully scan every single living creature on this star realm. He didn't leave a single blade of glass unturned. Shui Meiyin quietly stood to the side as her black eyes stared unblinkingly at the serious expression on his face. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. Given Xianxia's current soul power, he wouldn't need to waste much time scanning the entire 7-star realm. All of a sudden, his body jerked up straight as his aura shuddered violently. He started convulsing as well, and it looked like he had suddenly been smashed in the chest by a gigantic mallet. Shui Meiyin jumped up in fright as she rushed forward and said, "What's happening?" Xianxia's eyes snapped open and they were rippling in violent shock. He couldn't even bring himself to speak intelligibly at the moment. "Big brother Xianxia, big brother Xianxia." Shui Meiyin was now completely and utterly frightened by what was happening. She embraced him tightly in helpless panic. Xianxia had reached such dazzling heights that Shui Meiyin couldn't imagine what could elicit such a frightening reaction from him. "I am possible, impossible, impossible." He kept repeating those words in a trance as his fingers started trembling and his aura grew more and more chaotic. He then suddenly seemed to have snapped awake from his reverie as profound light exploded from his body. He shot toward the south like a streaking meteor. Due to his loss of control, his exploding power flattened the ground for hundreds of kilometers around him. It was so strong that it even pushed Shui Meiyin back a few steps. "Big brother Xianxia!" Shui Meiyin yelled anxiously as she shot after him. Xianxia was flying very quickly, leaving a trail of shattered space and flattened land in his wake. Shui Meiyin could only barely keep up with him after she had unleashed her full power. A fierce and terrible battle was currently taking place in the southern part of the 7-star realm. A muscular young man that resembled a tiny mountain was currently fighting against 2 opponents. He was a divine profound practitioner, and his current cultivation was in the middle of the 3rd level of the divine origin realm. His opponents, however, were both at the 4th level of the divine origin realm. Anyone could tell how the battle was going with a single glance. The muscular young man's body was covered with wounds, and his power was being completely suppressed by both of his opponents. However, there wasn't a single hint of fear on his face, and his attacks kept growing fiercer and fiercer as he forged ahead through gritted teeth. Boom! A muffled explosion rang out in the air as the muscular man's attack was completely countered. A huge force slammed into his body, causing blood to gush out of his mouth, but he didn't retreat a single inch. Unfortunately for him, the attacks didn't end there, as another huge force shot forward and slammed straight into his abdomen. The muscular man gave a low groan as he flew across the ground, tumbling many times before finally coming to a stop. "Heh, not bad. His bones are pretty solid." The 7-star realm profound practitioner who had hit him shook his hand, which was throbbing in pain, as a cold smile appeared on his face. It's too bad that this tough guy is rushing off to become the lapdog of a devil. Tui, the other seven-star realm profound practitioner spat in a contemptuous voice. Who? The muscular man blew out a long breath as he pushed himself off the ground. He glared at his two assailants with eyes as ferocious and wild as those of a fierce beast. Even though he had been completely beaten by his opponents, he still radiated a stubborn pride that would bend to no one. I'll say this one last time, the muscular man rumbled in a grim voice. The Yun Chi that I'm looking for isn't this devil master of the north that you keep talking about. He's a normal human being. My brother-in-law. People who share the same name are countless in this vast universe. Are you guys so stupid that you don't even understand what I'm saying, or are you deliberately using this opportunity to bully the weak? Whoa, he actually dares to scold us? The seven-star realm profound practitioner on the left scoffed as he arched one of his eyebrows sardonically. He swung his arm up and down, causing the joints in his arm to make a popping sound. You don't think that you're going to die an ugly enough death already? Hess, looking at you right now, you must be some hick that just climbed up from one of the lower realms. The seven-star realm profound practitioner on the right looked at the muscular young man with an arrogant disdain and contempt. It was as if he was the arbiter of this young man's fate. The person you're trying to find might very well not be the devil master of the north. However, you daring to mention that name in front of us means that you must die. That devil master of the north is a demon that both the heavens and the earth condemn, an evil that is beyond all redemption. Right now, he is stepping on the head of the southern divine region with just a single foot. And as men of the southern divine region, all of us have the right to punish him. As such, anyone who believes in, is willing to submit to, or is related in any way to the devil master of the north, is someone we have to kill. It would be better for us to kill an innocent by mistake than to spare someone associated with him. After he finished speaking, he lunged forward. The full power of a level 4 divine origin profound practitioner gathered in his right arm, as he cruelly slammed his right fist down toward the muscular young man's skull. Even though he was well aware that this person had just ascended from the lower realm and couldn't possibly be related to the devil master. Unfortunately for this young man, being weak was the original sin. BOOM. The young man raised an arm that was popping with engorged veins as he took his opponent's blow head-on. The fury in his eyes swiftly transformed into a shocking violent malice as his voice grew incredibly deep. You've taken things too far. Bang. A gigantic power that couldn't belong to someone who was only at the third level of the divine origin realm suddenly erupted from the young man's body and sent the man who had just attacked him flying. Ah, as he let out a flustered and panicked cry, the seven-star realm profound practitioner heavily slammed into the ground. The force of the blast caused him to tumble many times before he could stagger to his feet. He was just about to launch into a tirade and attack the young man again, when he saw that his companion was staring dazedly at him. As the muscular man slowly stood up, a golden light that was so dense that it dazzled the eyes started radiating from his chest, the place where everyone's profound veins were located. The golden light was accompanied by a soul-shaking power that made them feel as if a mountain was pressing down on their hearts and souls. The tyrannical emperor's divine veins. Both the seven-star realm profound practitioners cried out that name at the same time, and they looked as if they were staring at a ghost. The muscular man raised a fist, and a faint golden hue could be seen within the profound energy that was gathered there. It made it seem like his arms were covered in profound metal. I didn't wish to expose this at all, he said in a deep voice, a murderous look forming in his eyes. But since you're trying to push me beyond the point of no return, you can die. Even though they were currently facing a denizen of the lower realm whose profound strength was weaker than theirs by an entire level, both seven-star realm profound practitioners took a step backwards. The tyrannical emperor's divine veins, the legacy of the ancient war god, was a type of dreadful profound veins born purely for the sake of battle, destruction, and raw power. As the primordial aura in the primal chaos dimension grew thinner and thinner, the tyrannical emperor's divine veins had slowly started disappearing from the god realm. However, there was one thing that was always true when someone with the tyrannical emperor's divine veins appeared. The ones who possessed the tyrannical emperor's divine veins would always end up becoming rulers. The least among them would become kings of a star realm, while the greatest among them had become god emperors. What do we do? The profound practitioner on the right said in a shaky voice. They had never dreamed that this denizen of the lower realm, whom they had been bullying because of the name Xianxia, would turn out to be some freakish monster out of legend. The profound practitioner on the left gritted his teeth before he yelled, "What else can we do? We've already completely offended him. If we let him grow, we're only dooming ourselves." Both of them exchanged a glance before nodding. After that, they forcibly swallowed their fear and started circulating their profound energy. Their hands started to flash with profound light as they took out their strongest profound artifacts and weapons. Right now, it was no longer about having fun or bullying someone weaker than themselves. It was a matter of survival. They had to kill the young man in front of them, no matter what price they had to pay. Even though those who possessed the legendary tyrannical emperor's divine veins were said to have the shocking ability to best those stronger than them, they no longer had any other choice. Just as the two of them had resolved to battle to their death, the piercing screech of space being splintered resounded in their ears. They saw the ground start to undulate like the waves of the ocean before a dark and cold storm engulfed them. UWAH! All three men gave a cry of misery as they were sent flying by this dark storm that seemed to have descended from heaven. When they raised their heads to stare at the sky in shock, they saw a black figure floating high in the skies above them. His arrival had caused the blue dome of heaven to darken rapidly, and everything seemed to freeze up amidst that cold darkness. They felt as if countless devilish fangs were sinking into their bodies, souls, and hearts as a great terror, unlike any they had ever experienced before, washed over them. Star Realm, an aura like nothing the world had ever experienced before, was brimming like a volcano. Xianxia's gaze and aura were fully locked on the muscular man in front of him. His chest was heaving up and down, his eyes were trembling. He had never been shaken this badly since he entered the northern divine region and became a devil. He couldn't forget the brawny man before him even if he tried. He was a friend who was closer than family and a brother who should have been dead many years ago. He was none other than Xianxia himself. It had been more than 4 years since they had last met, but Xianxia was a bit less brawny than Xianxia remembered him to be. The tyrannical emperor's divine veins must have altered his physique slightly after he entered the divine way. His features were firmer than before, and his aura stronger. However, even if he were to change several times more drastically than this, Xianxia would still recognize him instantly. It was because he was Xianxia, not to mention that the tyrannical emperor's divine veins were shining like the sun on his chest right now. To Xianxia, there were only a handful of people he could identify faster and easier than Xianxia, and yet he couldn't stop looking the man up and down and scanning him with his spiritual perception again, and again, and again. He just couldn't believe it. A doppelganger. His life aura and profound aura are identical to Xianxia's, and he has the tyrannical emperor's divine veins. But he should already be. Xianxia, a god emperor, had destroyed the blue pole star with her own hands, so how could he still be alive? Forget the people living on that planet, there was barely any debris when all was said and done. While he was staring at Xianxia was staring at him as well. If Xianxia's change was significant, then Xianxia looked almost nothing like he used to. His hair was more than twice as long as it used to be, and it looked like it was woven from the fabric of night itself. The way it spread out like an infinite curtain of darkness behind his back was intimidating, to say the least. The Xianxia knew preferred pale-colored clothing. This was especially true after he entered Frozen Cloud Immortal Palace and wore white almost all the time. However, this Xianxia wore a black robe with dangerous, devilish runes etched onto the fabric. His skin color looked unnaturally pale. His eyes and aura looked completely different from before. Xianxia felt like his blood had turned into ice, and his soul wouldn't stop trembling like a leaf. The only thing this man had similar to Xianxia were his face and his body shape. He's not brother-in-law. For a time, the two brothers who grew up in floating Cloud City together and were closer than most blood-related brothers dared not call out to one another. Devil Master! An unpleasant noise cut through the haze temporarily. It was the two seven-star realm profound practitioners letting out a cry of abject terror from the bottom of their souls. When they saw Xianxia, every hair on their bodies stood on end, and the fear pouring out of their pores seemed almost tangible. Mercy, Devil Master! Mercy! Mercy! They had no doubt that the Devil Master had heard every word of the bold claim they made to the lower realm profound practitioner with the tyrannical emperor's divine veins. They couldn't believe that such bad luck actually existed in this world. They wanted to be anywhere but here, but they couldn't inject any energy into their legs at all. Forget standing, they didn't even remember how to use profound energy. All they could do was crawl away like a pair of legless, despairing larvae. Xianxia didn't move, but the two profound practitioners suddenly scattered into black dust without a sound. The world turned silent once more, but Xia Yuanba didn't notice because he was too absorbed by Xianxia. Meanwhile, Shui Meiyan had finally caught up to Xianxia. Her confusion turned into shock when she saw Xianxia and Xia Yuanba staring at one another. "Yuan, ba," Xianxia whispered so softly it was as if he was afraid that it would shatter the illusion. "Is it you?" Xia Yuanba's eyes bulged. The moment he heard his name, all his fear and doubts turned into wild joy. He jumped to his feet and cried out in excitement. "Yes, it's me, brother-in-law, it's me. You're still alive. You're still alive." The familiar name rocked his body like an energy blast. There were only two people in the entire world who addressed him like this, and they were Keijai and Xia Yuanba. So he had to be Yuanba. Yuanba is alive. Yuanba's alive? The Devil Master was terrifying to say the least, but it was as if Yuanba couldn't perceive his aura at all. He ran up to Xianxia with obvious joy and excitement on his face. No matter what Xianxia turned into, no matter how high he climbed in the future, Xianxia would always be Xianxia to Xia Yuanba, a brother he loved and trusted unconditionally. "I finally found you, brother-in-law. I finally." The brawny man had to bite his lips and suppress a sob before he could even get 2 sentences in. Tears still welled in his eyes, however. He grinned while wiping his tears away. "You disappeared for so many years that I thought, SSS, that's not important anymore. As long as you're safe, then all is well. Thank goodness." Shui Meiyan couldn't close her mouth when realization struck her. Gradually, a pool of complex emotions colored her eyes, and she let it all out in a quiet sigh. "Is this what they call fate?" Xia Yuanba was so agitated that he was crying and smiling at the same time. On the surface, it looked like Xianxia was untouched by the reunion, but in reality, he was reacting even worse than Yuanba was. Excitement, confusion, and all sorts of other emotions he couldn't describe nearly caused his brain to stall. He stretched out and touched Xia Yuanba on the arm. He felt his powerful, volcano-like life aura. "You're alive," he whispered. "He, of course I am." Xia Yuanba thumped himself in the chest. "The ascension to the God realm is as dangerous as you said, brother-in-law, but I'm no pushover anymore. In fact, I even managed to find you." He obviously failed to get what Xianxia really meant. "Speaking of which," he looked Xianxia up and down again before chuckling. "You've changed a lot, I see. It looks strange, but it's a bit cool too. Also, didn't those 2 bullies call you the Devil Master earlier? Are you really the huh?" He turned his head to check on the 2 scumbags who attacked him earlier, only to trail off in confusion. It was because they were nowhere to be seen. Meanwhile, Xianxia had been doing his utmost to steady his heart and breathing. It was only now that he calmed down just a little. Xianxia's grip on Xian Yuanba's arm tightened as he asked, "Did you leave the Blue Pole Star 4 years ago?" Considering the power that was used to Blue Pole Star back then, there was no chance Xia Yuanba could have survived the attack. Therefore, the only possibility left was if he was never there to receive it in the first place, if he had left Blue Pole Star before it happened. Thanks to the divine water of life, Xia Yuanba was already at the first level of the divine origin realm at the time. He would have had the power to travel across space by then, albeit barely. "What? Of course not." But a surprised Xia Yuanba shook his head immediately. He was puzzled as to why Xianxia would say such a strange thing. "I departed 4 months ago and arrived at this 7-star realm just the day before today. So you can imagine how pleasantly surprised I was to find you so soon." Besides that, there were many things he wanted to ask Xianxia about. For example, he wanted to know why everyone he tried to talk to had run away like the plague when he brought up the name Xianxia. The 2 scumbags just now had even attacked him outright. 4 months ago? Xianxia shook his head. "No, that cannot be." Xia Yuanba scratched his head and said embarrassedly, "I know I made it way slower than I should have. I ran into several major spatial turbulences and even landed on several dead planets on the way. Seriously, I was as aimless as a headless fly at the time. Obviously, I'm nowhere as good as you are, brother-in-law. It doesn't matter anymore, though. Now that I know that you're safe, I can't wait to travel back right away and tell everyone you're fine," Xian Yuanba said with a grin. Xianxia's mouth opened and closed mechanically. "Everyone, you mean? Well, you went missing for several years straight. Everyone was worried about you, you know." Xia Yuanba turned serious. "Do you know how long Wuxin cried after you missed her 18th birthday?" She was going to come to the god realm herself after you missed her 19th birthday as well. I had to promise her that I would travel to the god realm right away, and many more to stop her. It was like a bomb had exploded in Yun-Chi's head. Wuxin, 19th birthday, clap, clap, clap. Every word felt like a lightning bolt to the soul. 3 whole breaths of wordless shock later, Yun-Chi's grip around Xia Yuanba's tightened like a vice. What the hell are you talking about? What Wuxin? What 19th birthday? What are you? Which Wuxin are you talking about? Which Wuxin? Which Wuxin? His grip had tightened to the point where Xia Yuanba had to grimace in pain, but it was nowhere as disturbing as Yun-Chi's current expression. Eyes widening like saucers, a panicked Xia Yuanba shouted in confusion. Who else I'm talking about? I'm talking about your daughter, of course. Ow, brother-in-law, are you okay? Yun-Chi bit the tip of his tongue, filling his mouth with pain and the scent of blood. Chest still heaving up and down rapidly, he forced himself to calm down and let go of Xia Yuanba. Gritting his teeth and stealing his gaze, he uttered, You're lying. You're lying. We are in the southern realm of the southern divine region. There's no way you could make it here in 4 months from the outer rim of eastern divine region. Everything you told me up until now is a lie. He had witnessed with his own eyes Xia Qingyu destroying the blue pole star in a single strike. He had felt the wave of planet dust and smelled the bloody stench of the death of countless lives. That couldn't possibly be a false memory. Even if it was, the god emperors and realm kings nearby couldn't possibly have been mistaken as well. He had stared at his own home planet from space many times. It was blue, mysterious, and enchanting even when compared to the dazzling stars around it. He could never mistake its light, its space, and its position. He just couldn't. Just the same, there was no way his daughter could still be alive. The outer rim of eastern divine region? Xia Yuanba's eyes somehow bulged even wider. Now that you mention it, that is another thing I wanted to ask you about. Didn't you tell me that the closest divine region to the blue pole star is the eastern divine region? That was why I tried flying west after I left our planet. However, I quickly discovered that I was flying in the wrong direction because the further I traveled, the thinner and murkier the energy became. Yun-Chi. It was only after I changed my path and flew north that I finally arrived here. If I hadn't gotten this wrong from the start, I'm sure I would have arrived much sooner. Yun-Chi's eyes grew darker. You flew north and arrived here. You're telling me that blue pole star is to the south of the southern divine region. Of course. Xia Yuanba nodded affirmatively. I was worried that I would screw up the direction again, so I even left a ton of soul imprints to be sure. He pointed to the south and said, That is where blue pole star is, to the south of the southern divine region. In fact, it's almost directly south from this 7-star realm, am I wrong? He suddenly shivered from head to toe. It was because a cold, murderous intent had wrapped around his person. Chi's eyes turned chilly as he let out a low chuckle. I don't know how you managed to disguise yourself so perfectly, but you can't be Yuanba. Who are you? How dare you? Make a fool. Out of me, Yun-Chi was somehow both perfectly aware and confused at the same time. His fury and killing intent were real, but he controlled them carefully so that they wouldn't hurt a hair on his friend. He was certain that the man before him was Yuanba, but he was equally certain that he couldn't be Yuanba. His appearance, aura, expression, eyes, and tyrannical emperor's divine veins all pointed to him being the one and only. Yet all the words coming from his mouth were complete nonsense. The kind that touched on his most taboo subject, no less. The Yuanba he knew would never lie to him. Yun-Chi felt so confused he felt like he was being split into two. Xia Yuanba wasn't faring much better himself. When he arrived in the god realm and encountered Yun-Chi almost immediately, he felt so happy it was as if the heavens had dropped a boon in his lap. His biggest fears and worries had all but vanished in the blink of an eye. Sure, Yun-Chi was so different that he was reluctant to address him at first, but that all changed to wild joy and excitement after the young man had made the first move. However, everything he said and displayed after that worried him deeply, especially the last part where Yun-Chi denied his very identity and directed his killing intent at him. After his shock had passed, Xia Yuanba stared at Yun-Chi's twisting features and replied firmly, Brother-in-law, I'm not sure what's the problem here, but I am the one and only Xia Yuanba. If you truly are my brother-in-law, then you will never mistake me for someone else. He extended his arms and showed Yun-Chi a jade tablet that was shining a golden light in his left hand, and a short ruler surrounded by an ancient aura in his right. He said, This is Absolute Monarch Sanctuary's Saint Emperor Seal and the Primal Chaos Heavenly Ruler. At the Supreme Ocean Hall, the former Saint Emperor, Xianxia himself handed them to me right before your eyes. Yun Qi's trembling gaze focused onto the Saint Emperor seal and primal chaos, heavenly ruler immediately. Next, Xia Yuanba flipped his palm around and back to reveal a white pill overflowing with snowy aura. This is the snow-colored pellet you gave to me back then. You wanted me to give this to my future wife as a beauty gift, but women are so troublesome, so I haven't, Oh, right. He suddenly pointed at the stones hanging around Yun Qi's neck. The 3 stones you're wearing around your neck are the tricolored glazed sound stones Wuxin gifted you. You boasted to me about it back then. Also, I was asking you about my sister back then, and you told me that you would take me to the God realm yourself if I could solidify my cultivation in 2 years. It has been more than 4 years since that day, though. You and my sister got married at 16. After that, we entered New Moon Profound Palace together and made the acquaintance of Kang Yue. She called herself Lan Zuruo at the time. When you were 17, you fought in the Blue Wind ranking tournament held at Heavenly Sword Villa and defeated my sister. Later on, you took heavy injuries in order to protect me and were sealed into the Sword Management Terrace together with a demon. You later discovered that the demon was your grandfather, Yun Kanghai. Also, and Xia Yuanba went through one experience after another like an inexhaustible pipe. Many of them were known only to him and Yuanba. They crushed the suspicions Yun Qi had forced himself to conjure into nothing. Xia Yuanba was undoubtedly Xia Yuanba. At this point, there was nothing he could come up with to deny it. But why did he say those things? Blue Pole Star was in the Eastern Divine region, right? Blue Pole Star was destroyed right before his eyes, right? He had lost Wuxin forever a long time ago, right? He allowed his killing intent to fall away and grabbed Xia Yuanba's arms again. Yuanba! Yun Qi tried his best to speak in a calm voice. Blue Pole Star is to the east of the Eastern Divine region. Moreover, it was destroyed 4.5 years ago. Wuxin, everyone, they all died a long time ago. This time, it was Xia Yuanba who nearly saw his eyeballs fall out of his eye sockets. Brother-in-law, what in the world are you talking about? Like I told you, I left the Blue Pole Star just 4 months ago. And before that, I was living in the profound sky continent most of the time. Sure, I occasionally traveled to the illusory demon realm to take a look, and twice I sneaked a peek at the azure cloud continent you mentioned to me because I was curious. But I have been on Blue Pole Star all this time. All the continents are doing just fine. Even the demon beast stampedes that were plaguing us earlier quickly faded into nothing after you left. So what in the world do you mean by destroyed? The light in Yun Qi's pupils, his aura, his very being turned as motionless as a statue. During the first 2 years of your departure, Wuxin wished day and night for you to return to her. After that, she started cultivating like crazy so she could look for you in the God realm herself. The little demon empress, Fairy Yuechen, Feng Zuer, everyone did their best to conceal their feelings and console each other. But even I could see how depressed they were. Just like Wuxin, they cultivated day and night in hopes of looking for you one day. Every time I visit Uncle Yun and Aunt Mew, I can feel their sorrow. Grandpa Zio and Grandpa Mew ask me almost every day if you've come home. You said that you would come home in no time that year, but 1 year turned into 2, 2 turned into 3, and 3 turned into 4. It was just a worry at the beginning. But over time it turned into something no one dared to say for fear that it would come true. We were all terrified that you were in the God realm. Yun Qi staggered half a step backward. His mind had been blown to smithereens at this point. So why haven't you come home to see us? Why did you say that the Blue Pole Star was destroyed? And why did you think that everyone was dead? Xia Yuanba actually took half a step forward and pressed. Is something wrong, brother-in-law? What in the world happened to you? I don't understand a word of what you just told me. Just what in the world is going on? Yun Qi's mind was imploding even now. It ravaged his mind and soul, halted his thoughts, shattered his cool, and even blurred his vision like a kaleidoscope. The death of the Blue Pole Star had shattered his heart and soul. It was the event that pushed everything, his life, his soul, and his faith, into the absolute abyss. Hate and the thirst for vengeance were the 2 biggest things that kept him going all this time. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they had reforged his entire soul. They had wiped out all the goodness, the hesitation, the ties in his heart, and his natural respect toward the heavenly way, humanity, and life itself. They had driven him into going on a mad crusade for power, violence, killing, and destruction. In fact, he had just threatened and humiliated a woman he knew was innocent a moment ago. Now Zia Yuanba had destroyed practically everything he believed in with his words. He felt like stars were exploding inside his very soul and tearing it apart. He clutched his head with both hands. His fingers pressed down so strongly that he nearly crushed his own skull. The blue pole star is untouched. Yun Wuxin, the little demon empress, Chu Yuechen, father and mother, both my grandfathers are still alive. Alive. Where is this coming from? What I saw with my own eyes back then, what I heard from Zia Yuanba now, is this a dream? Chaos? Or have I fallen into a completely different world without knowing? This cannot be true. Where am I? It's real. No, it can't be real. Big brother Yun Qi. It sounded as crisp as an abacus counter striking against the wood. A pure voice had reached the deepest depths of his soul, dispelled the madness that was fogging his mind, and returned clarity to both vision and mind. He looked up and saw Shui Meiyin. Then his pupils shrank to the size of needles. He saw a light so red that it hurt the soul. A long time ago, the same light had caused countless realm kings and god emperors to quake in fear. It was because it looked almost identical to the crimson crack that appeared on the wall of primal chaos. Right now, Shui Meiyin was holding a black needle that was only about as long as her forearm and half an inch wide. It looked like nothing special besides the fact that it was completely black in color. The crimson light had come from its tip. Yun Qi had seen this needle before. In fact, many realm kings and god emperors had seen it as well. It was because it had made its first appearance alongside the heaven-smiting devil emperor herself. It was the artifact she had used to carve a literal passage through the walls of primal chaos, the world piercer. Everyone, including Yun Qi, had thought that the heaven-smiting devil emperor had taken the world piercer with her, that the profound heavenly treasure was permanently lost to the world. He had no idea that it was in Shui Meiyin's hands. Zia Yuanba was staring at the profound artifact with his mouth agape as well. It was as if his soul was sucked into the crimson light. "How did you, big brother Yun Qi?" Shui Meiyin said gently again. "Cease your questions and thoughts for now, okay? I'm going to take you to a place. You'll understand everything once you're there. I will explain everything to you then." Meanwhile, Zia Yuanba shook his head violently and broke free from the attraction that was the crimson light. It was only then that he looked closely at Shui Meiyin. He had expected this, and he was not surprised. It was yet another fairy-like beauty. The tyrannical emperor's divine veins were born for war. Therefore, his battle lust would grow alongside his power and divine veins until its owner was transformed into a complete battle maniac. However, it meant that the rest of his desires would be devoured by that battle lust as well. It was why Yuanba couldn't understand Yun Qi's tendency to add a new woman to his harem every outing or two at all. The mere idea of interacting with a woman and being managed by one sent shivers up his spine. More than one. Please, anything but that. But before we go, I must request that you suppress your aura to the maximum. All of it. I know you can do it, big brother Yun Qi. Shui Meiyin understood how confused Yun Qi was feeling right now, which was why she injected her voice with her unique power of the soul, the stainless soul sound. Despite Yun Qi's confusion, he still noticed that something was about to happen. So he stopped asking and thinking as Shui Meiyin requested and activated both hidden flowing lightning and moon-splitting cascade. He withdrew his aura until he was practically untraceable. Shui Meiyin let out a soft sigh of relief before bringing up the world piercer. Then she made a tiny wave. There was no sound or spatial aura at all, but Yun Qi, Shui Meiyin, and Zia Yuanba suddenly vanished into thin air. An instant later, the scenery before them changed, and a cold wind blasted against their faces. The cold energy of this place was several tiers weaker than Snow Song realms. It couldn't cool even the weakest divine way profound practitioner. Yun Qi shivered from head to toe, however. It was because he once thought that he would never be able to feel this cold ever again. The world beneath his feet was white and infinite. The ice and snow whipping across the air looked like they would never stop. There was one thing that was different from the seemingly infinite expanse of snow, however. It was a series of connected palaces, and they looked as sacred as they were lonely in this white world. Yun Qi felt like someone had pulled the rug from beneath him. Below him was the snow region of extreme ice. The palaces at the distance were none other than the frozen cloud immortal palace he and the fairies had constructed together. Yuanba stared at the snow region of extreme ice in front of him in shock before looking at Shui Meiyin. "Oh my God, this girl is amazing. Wait a second, it took me 4 months to get to the God realm. I haven't even stood on its soil for 3 days, and now I'm all the way back already. Come on." Zia Yuanba complained a bit in his head before facing toward Yun Qi again, shouting, "See, brother-in-law. This is the snow region of extreme ice. Not only is the blue pole star fine, it's way more stable than it was several years ago. And you wonder why I'm surprised when you said that it was duh. Yun Qi didn't react in the slightest. He looked like his soul wasn't present in his body. Palace Master Murong and Fairy Yuechen should be inside the building right now. Wuxin frequents here daily as well. Ah, that's right, Zia Yuanba abruptly grabbed Yun Qi's arm and pulled. Come on, let's go meet them already so they can rest easy. Shui Meiyan's eyes flashed before he could finish his sentence, and Zia Yuanba abruptly froze like a statue. His eyes widened when he realized that he could neither move nor speak. From an outsider's point of view, the only thing that proved that he was still conscious was his moving eyeballs. "Big brother Yun Qi," whispered Shui Meiyan while moving closer to Yun Qi and feeling the tremors in his soul, "don't doubt that this is the blue pole star. You are without a doubt in the home planet you miss so much right now. This is neither an illusion nor a dream. Your relatives, your family, your best friends, your lovers, your daughter, they are all alive. They have always been alive and well." Yun Qi's fingers shook in Shui Meiyan's palm. His teeth were chattering visibly as well. Shui Meiyan continued, "It's because the planet the moon god emperor destroyed was a planet called Sky Water Star. You mistook it for the blue pole star because they are similar in terms of size and color. It is even harder to differentiate them from space. The position we're at right now is where the Sky Water Star used to be. Blue Pole Star and Sky Water Star had switched places before that destruction. The Blue Pole Star was teleported to the south of the southern Divine region, and the Sky Water Star was teleported to the east of the eastern Divine region." Zia Yuanba's eyeballs nearly fell out of their sockets. He felt like he was listening to some impossible myth. Shui Meiyan raised the world piercer and said quietly, "Moving planets sounds like the kind of miracle only an ancient true god can pull off, right? But there is still one item in the world that can do this. It was a one-time miracle that may never happen again, but it happened perfectly because of you." Her voice brushed his soul again and again like a gentle wind. Yun Qi's fingers twitched as he slowly, very slowly, stretched his arms forward. He looked like he was trying to touch the world before him, a world he thought he had lost forever in his life. The shivering in his arms wasn't a conscious action. It was a kind of desire born from the bottom of his heart. At the same time, he released his soul perception in an attempt to reach out to the people and souls he thought he had lost forever. A surprised Shui Meiyan tried to stop him, but Yun Qi himself shivered as if realizing something and withdrew it in a panic. He even stopped breathing as if the action was enough to reveal his presence to the world. "Big brother, Yun Qi." Shui Meiyan felt a twinge in her nose and hugged him gently. Yun Qi hadn't stopped shivering since the beginning. He clenched his teeth tightly and forced down something primal that was threatening to escape his throat. Shui Meiyan's voice caused a tear to fall off, however. It fell toward the infinite snow beneath his feet and vanished from sight. 10 breaths, 20 breaths. It was so quiet that only the wind, the snow, and the occasional sound that escaped Yun Qi's throat could be heard. "Big brother Yun Qi." Shui Meiyan tugged at his sleeve once, and the silence was finally broken. Yun Qi slowly turned around to face Yuanba. His eyes were closed, and he was doing his utmost to control his expression, his emotions and his aura, but his facial muscles were still twitching uncontrollably against his will. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded hoarse and distant. "Go home, Yuanba. Don't tell anyone that you've seen me." To regain what he lost, but to have to conceal his presence from his loved ones, much less meet them. Right now, his soul felt like a lone boat braving the biggest storm he had ever seen in his life. Shui Meiyan released her soul shackle on Yuanba, and the latter regained control of his body and his senses after a shiver. A sudden pressure pressed against his heart when he looked at Yun Qi again. He felt so heavy that he almost couldn't breathe. Zia Yuanba had far too many questions he wanted to shoot at Yun Qi, but he wasn't the innocent, foolish youth he used to be anymore. He knew that this was not the time. He simply asked, "When will you come back, brother-in-law?" A short silence later. "When I have killed everyone who deserves to die." He said the darkest things in the shakiest voice. "Got it," Zia Yuanba nodded before sucking in a small breath. "I haven't forgotten the day you risked your life to save me, brother-in-law. Later on, you saved Blue Wind, Illusory Demon Realm, Profound Sky Continent, and even the entire Blue Pole Star. Although I've not truly seen the broader world with my eyes, you will always be the greatest hero in my heart. I know that you are bearing something I can't understand again, and it's something heavier than anything you've ever borne in the past. But no matter what happens, you must come back safe and sound. There are countless people who are worried about you and waiting for you to return. You are far more important to them than you can ever imagine. That is why you must come back safe and sound, okay? Yun-Chi didn't reply or turn away. The only visible reaction Yuanba could see was Yun-Chi's fingers whitening from the sheer amount of force he was exerting on them. A long time later, after Yun-Chi finally looked away from Yuanba, the brawny man exhaled a little and got ready to jump down to the snowy region below him. That was when he saw something that caused his eyes to shrink and his mouth to blurt out, "Wuxin?" Yun-Chi's shivering abruptly ceased completely. One breath, two breath. Yun-Chi's already shaky reason was instantly torn apart by burning desire. He abruptly turned around and stared at the direction Yuanba was facing toward. Shui Meiyin tightened her grip around his hand, but didn't stop him. He saw a woman walking slowly across the snow. The snowy region should have been a scenery nothing in the human world could top, and yet they all turned into mere decorations when she showed up. It was as if every light in the world was focused on the woman. When Yun-Chi left, Yun Wuxin was less than 15 years old. Today, she was almost 20. This period was the most beautiful period of a girl's life. Every year was a beautiful, once-in-a-lifetime transformation. The childishness and naivety Yun Wuxin freely displayed in front of him was no longer present in Yun Wuxin. She had become an extraordinarily pure and beautiful woman just like her mother. Her footsteps were slow and light. It was almost as if she wasn't willing to disturb this eternal world of ice with her presence. Her hair had grown past her waist. It swayed in the same rhythm as her skirt. Her eyes looked like stars surrounded by nebulae. Unfortunately, the nebula cloud was made up of heart-aching sorrow. The snow she was stepping on was pure white, and yet she seemed to shine even holier and whiter than it was. Her beauty was so pure and ethereal that it was as if she was the most perfect creation of the heavens. One look was enough to drown anyone in her beauty. She was his daughter. Warmth threatened to burst out of his heart. His blood felt boiling hot in his veins. Yun-Chi gripped Shui Meiyin's hand tightly for fear that he would lose control and hug Wuxin. She had grown up. His daughter had grown up. Not only had he missed every day, every year of her miraculous growth, it was a period he could never regain. "We should leave, big brother Yun-Chi." Shui Meiyin called out quietly and broke him out of his reverie. Wrenching his eyes away from Wuxin with willpower that bordered on cruelty, he closed his eyes and remained that way. "Yuanba," he said quietly, "I promise you that I will return safe and sound. Not only that, I will return faster than you can imagine." Xia Yuanba couldn't say a word. Yun-Chi had stopped himself from approaching Yun Wuxin after seeing her with his own eyes. He couldn't even imagine how heavy the burden Yun-Chi was carrying on his back was. He did the only thing he could, nodding to Yun-Chi and hitting his chest once as solemnly as possible. "Very well, brother-in-law, I'll be waiting. Until you return, I promise that no one will touch Blue Pole Star unless I'm dead." After that, Xia Yuanba attempted to jump off the cliff again. However, wait, Yun-Chi called out to him again. "Can you ask Wuxin something for me?" Xia Yuanba looked back at him and listened seriously. "Can you ask her if she hates me?" He never opened his eyes as he said this. Xia Yuanba looked conflicted, but he could hardly turn Yun-Chi down, especially in a situation like this. In the end, he forced himself to nod and say, "Okay." "Speaking of which, there's one thing I would like to ask you as well," Xia Yuanba said. "How is my sister doing?" Shui Meiyin. Yun-Chi didn't react much to that question. He replied in a low tone, "I promise I'll tell you everything after I've returned." It wasn't a real answer, but Xia Yuanba didn't push further. He nodded strongly again before saying, "Got it. Don't forget your promise, brother-in-law. You must return to us safe and sound, okay? Oh, and sister too, you must bring her home safe and sound as well. I'm still looking forward to seeing how your children will look, you know? Hee." Xia Yuanba gave him a bright smile and withdrew his aura. He then walked off the cliff and dropped down to the snowy region below. Yun-Chi remained where he was like a statue, and Shui Meiyin stayed by his side quietly. She didn't speak or urge him to move. She indulged him just like he always indulged her. After he judged that he had dropped enough distance, Xia Yuanba abruptly released his profound energy and sped up. He landed right in front of Yun Wuxin. The girl halted and stared at Xia Yuanba in surprise. "Uncle Xia, you're back." Xia Yuanba scratched his head with a regretful look on his face. "I ran into a couple spatial turbulences I couldn't overcome as I approached the God realm, so I had to come back to prepare." Don't worry, I'm sure I'll succeed on the next trip. Wuxin's lips curled into a small smile. Her complexion looked whiter than even a snow sparkle. Thank you, Uncle Xia, and rest well. I'm sure the journey to that world was a difficult one. After that, he gave him a small nod, passed by him, and continued toward the nearby frozen cloud immortal palace. The years had made her as dispassionate as her mother was. Wuxin, Xia Yuanba hurriedly stopped her before she could vanish. I have a question I would like to ask you about. Yun Wuxin stopped in her tracks and looked back at him. Please ask, Uncle Xia. His heart rate quickened for no real reason. He was fully aware that Yun Qi was watching them from the sky. Do you hate your father? Just a tiny bit. Xia Yuanba squeezed the voice out of his throat. Despite his best attempts, his voice sounded a little dry even to himself. The snowy winds suddenly stopped howling, and one could even faintly hear the beat of a wildly pounding heart in the vast, still whiteness that seemed to stretch on forever. Of course I do. That calm and quiet reply caused Xia Yuanba's heart to drop in his chest, because he knew that Yun Qi was definitely listening. How can I not hate him? She didn't turn around to look at Xia Yuanba. Instead, she kept staring into the distance as her voice turned even colder and gloomier than the boundless snow. He wasn't around when I was born. He wasn't there as I was growing up. He didn't even come to my coming-of-age ceremony when I turned 18. He told me that I was his whole world. He told me that he'd never let my mother and I get hurt or cry again. He told me that he'd be back before I even knew it. He told me that he wanted to watch me grow older, to make up for everything that he owed me. But he broke every promise he made, over and over again. He's the most unreliable father, the most ill-qualified father, the worst father in the world. Her voice was very soft and light, and although it sounded a little faint at times, one couldn't hear any emotion in it. In the skies high above them, far higher than where her senses could reach, Yun Qi slowly closed his eyes. He had clenched his jaw so hard that a small rivulet of blood was slowly trickling from the corner of his mouth. Shui Meiyin stretched out a hand to wipe away the blood before she gently closed her palm. He clearly said that he wouldn't allow anyone to steal him away from me, but why does he keep choosing to abandon me time after time, again and again? I hate him so much. After she softly muttered those words, she started to slowly walk away. Xia Yuanba couldn't see her expression right now, and her voice had been so cold and calm that it had practically frozen his heart. He stretched out a hand to stop her, but he simply couldn't find the words to say. At this time, Yun Wuxin suddenly stopped and turned around to look at him. Uncle Xia, she said as she stared straight into Xia Yuanba's eyes with those clear and innocent eyes of hers. Have you already met him? This sent a jolt through Xia Yuanba, who was currently deeply emotional. He anxiously waved his hands and exclaimed, No, 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 absolutely not. If not, I would have definitely brought him home. Upon seeing Xia Yuanba's reaction, a flowing light flashed through Yun Wuxin's beautiful eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but she ended up stopping herself several times before she finally asked in a slow and measured voice, You really did see him, huh? You saw him and he's still around, right? Xia Yuanba had always been terrible at lying. He wasn't even as good as your average human being, much less someone like Yun Qi, who could spin a web of lies with an absolutely straight face. It would have been better if he hadn't tried to deny it, because this denial had so many holes in it that it was practically an admission in Yun Wuxin's eyes. Xia Yuanba panikedly retreated a few steps as Yun Wuxin continued to stare at him. He wanted to make another strong denial, but the moment he opened his mouth, all the air went out of him and his head sagged in defeat instead. Who? He let out a long sigh as a look of resignation crossed his face. After that, he made sure that he didn't look towards where Yun Qi was as he avoided Yun Wuxin's gaze and replied, Yes, in truth, I successfully managed to go to the God realm, and I met your father under extremely fortuitous circumstances. Since everything he said was true this time, Xia Yuanba didn't show any of the tells he gave away when he did try to lie. Once he said those words, Xia Yuanba's body instantly relaxed. He felt guilty toward Yun Qi, but he felt a lot better now that he had gotten it all out. Silence. A very long and drawn-out silence ensued after that. Xia Yuanba stared at Yun Wuxin with apprehensive eyes as she quietly stood in place. Her face was still as cold and calm as ever, and not a single ripple of emotion could be seen on her face. Yun Wuxin finally spoke. Then why didn't he come back to me? Why did he ask you to hide the truth? Did he receive some sort of debilitating injury that crippled him? No, absolutely not. He's extremely fine, not a single wound on him. I can guarantee that much at least." Since matters had already come to this, Xia Yuanba chose not to hide anything any longer. He solemnly said, "There are some very important tasks that he has to complete, tasks so important that even I can't quite understand them." "Wuxin," Xia Yuanba hurriedly continued, "I understand your father very well. The only reason he wouldn't have returned after all these years is because there have been some unforeseen difficulties and obstacles tying him down. After all, the place called the God Realm is unimaginably vast, and there must be something that's keeping him there. However, he did promise that he would return very soon. That was something that he said himself, a promise he was very sincere about." Xia Yuanba had already racked his brains to craft this answer for Yun Wuxin, so the only thing he could do now was anxiously wait for her response. "Is that so?" Yun Wuxin said in the softest of voices. After that, she simply turned around, her back facing Xia Yuanba once more. "I got it. Since he didn't want us to know about the chance meeting that two of you had, I won't tell Mother or my masters. Uncle Xia, you've been gone for several months, so Absolute Monarch Sanctuary has been worried to death about you. You should return as soon as possible and give them some peace of mind." She was already wandering into the boundless flying snow even as she said those words. "Wuxin, are you okay?" Xia Yuanba asked in a worried voice. Unfortunately, he did not receive a reply. Yun Wuxin's figure had already become indistinct and blurry as she disappeared into the never-ending blizzard. After Xia Yuanba shot a very apologetic look into the skies above him, he remained where he was standing for a while, a troubled look on his face. After that, he gave a short sigh before he turned around and flew toward the south. After all, Frozen Cloud Immortal Palace forbade all males besides Yunqi from entering, and he was no exception. The snowy winds were growing more and more frantic. This had become a common occurrence in the snow region of extreme ice since 4 years ago, when the entire blue pole star had shuddered violently. Ever since then, this region had grown even colder than it had been before. Yun Wuxin's steps grew slower and slower, and before she even knew it, her path had deviated away from where Frozen Cloud Immortal Palace lay. Thud. She suddenly staggered as she fell to her knees in the icy snow. She remained still for a very long time, her delicate shoulders gently trembling. However, this trembling began growing more and more intense. A hoarse sob that she desperately tried to suppress rang out in the snowy winds. Daddy!" She cried out those words in a desolate and miserable voice as a single tear fell from the eyes she had shut tight. It transformed into the purest and most lustrous snow crystal in the universe as it silently fell into the eternal ice that shrouded this land. "As long as you're safe, as long as you're safe. As long as you're safe, I'll wait for you no matter how long it takes. Daddy, I hate you, but I also really, really miss you." Finally, she couldn't hold back her sobbing any longer and tears fell from her eyes like water from a burst dam. She knelt in the snow as she clutched one hand to her chest and cried her heart out in the midst of that boundless land of ice and snow. The dim skies and howling winds hid her heartrending cries from the world as the snow swirled around her. Every teardrop, every pain-filled sob was filled with boundless longing, anger, sorrow, worry, and fear. In the clouds high above her, Yunqi desperately clutched at his chest, his fingers sinking deep into his flesh. "Let's go." Those 2 short words were said in such a tremulous voice that they were nearly unintelligible. Every second he stayed in the blue pole star increased the danger it was exposed to. He definitely couldn't let the nightmare of yesteryear come to pass again. He couldn't allow anyone to detect its existence, no matter what, even if there was an infinitesimally small chance of that happening in the first place. He could not meet her, could not stay here, could not even go a little bit closer, until there were finally no threats in this world. Shui Meiyin took out the world piercer and gently swished it in the air. Light and space bent around them as they returned to the 7-star realm. They also just so happened to appear in the place they had been before. Because he had discovered Xia Yuanba, the energies that Yunqi had unleashed had left a clear mark on the landscape. As a result, no one who was tracking him would realize that the planes had been broken in this place. Bang! Yunqi fell to his knees heavily, his fingers still painfully digging into his flesh. His face was a mask of warped anguish, and his entire body was shaking like a leaf in a storm. The harsh, grating sound of teeth grinding on teeth could be heard from his mouth. Shui Meiyin squatted down beside him and whispered, "Big brother Yunqi, I'm the only one here. No one else will be able to approach us." Those short few words actually caused the Devil Master, the ruler of the northern divine region, the monster who had stained 2 divine regions in blood, to completely collapse. His head smashed against the ground as he wailed loudly like a helpless child, his tears instantly staining the ground around him. His home, his family and friends, his clan, his wives and lovers, his daughter. They were actually still alive. He had never actually lost them. There was no greater blessing and joyous surprise in the universe than this for Xianxia. However, this great joy was also accompanied by a huge sorrow. A father and daughter lay separated by 2 worlds as both of them knelt in the ground and bitterly wept. They wailed their hearts out as they clutched their chests, and even the heavens and the earth seemed to mourn with them. Within the world of the sky poison pearl, He-Ling held both hands to her lips as she sobbed uncontrollably. "Woo! This is wonderful! This is simply wonderful! Woo!" She barely gasped as tears poured down her cheeks. "W-A-H?" Hunger was also wailing loudly, her tears scattering everywhere. Meanwhile, Yuer was staring at them with a vacant look on her face. She didn't know what to do right now. "So the heaven-smiting devil emperor gifted the world piercer to you quite soon after she arrived? Huh!" Xianxia's weeping lasted for more than an hour before his sobs gradually died down. Even now, his eyes were still red and swollen. Even though it seriously hurt his proud and dignified image as the devil master, he wasn't willing to use profound energy to fix it. Besides, the only person who could see him right now was Shui Meiyin, and she would always think that he was the most handsome person in the world, no matter what happened. He rested a hand lightly against his chest as he spoke. His heart no longer felt cold and dead. It was slowly throbbing with a warm heat. "Yes, she gave it to me quite soon after she had arrived." Shui Meiyin nodded her head as she gently traced the surface of the world piercer with a slender, jade-like finger. If anyone saw the ordinary black needle in her hand, an object that radiated no aura whatsoever, they would never think that this was the artifact ranked 6th among the 7 heavenly profound treasures, the world piercer. "No wonder you told me that the moon god emperor wouldn't be able to lock you up if you didn't wish for it," Xianxia said with a dry chuckle. Shui Meiyin replied, "I didn't want to endanger the glazed light realm any further or expose the fact that I held the world piercer, so I obediently allowed myself to be locked up in that place. I would only ever use the world pierce to sneak out a few times when I was absolutely sure that I wouldn't be caught." "Big brother Xianxia, in truth, Senior Devil Emperor wanted to leave the world piercer to you," Shui Meiyin suddenly said. Xianxia didn't look the least bit surprised when he heard those words. When he had finally calmed down and taken another look at the world piercer in Shui Meiyin's hands, the first emotion that actually flooded his heart was shock. Why hadn't the heaven-smiting devil emperor simply give it to him if she wasn't going to take it outside of the primal chaos? After all, both her daughters were bonded to him directly. The Void Illusion Stone was publicly acknowledged as the most powerful spatial artifact in the universe. It was so powerful that it could instantly teleport someone without leaving a single trace behind. The only flaw was that even the user did not know where he was going to be sent to. Back at the wall of primal chaos, Xianxia had used a Void Illusion Stone the enslaved Qianai Yinger had thrown to him to escape from certain doom. Back when the Blue Pole Star had been destroyed, Xianxia had escaped together with Mu Xunian's body using a Void Illusion Stone as well. In the annals of the God Realm, the Void Illusion Stone's power came from the World Piercer. There were very few of them left in the universe, and since there was no way to reproduce them in the time the World Piercer was exiled from the primal chaos together with the heaven-smiting Devil Emperor, the already small supply dwindled with every use. However, the World Piercer could not only do what the Void Illusion Stone did, it could also allow its user to set the coordinates to where they wanted to be teleported to. And it could be used an unlimited amount of times. This treasure was absolutely ridiculous in its ability to allow its user to escape, so he simply couldn't understand why the heaven-smiting Devil Emperor hadn't left it to him. What's more, during the era of gods, the World Piercer was the heavenly profound treasure that had belonged to the heretic god. Heaven-smiting Devil Emperor Jai Yuan was only in possession of it because he had given it to her as a betrothal gift. However, that was also why the Sky Poison Pearl had ended up in Xianxia's hand, as Jai Yuan had given it to the heretic god as her betrothal gift. He stared intently at Shui Meiyin as he waited for her to continue. Even though he was beyond puzzled by her decision, he knew very well that the heaven-smiting Devil Emperor must have had a very special reason for doing what she did. Meiyin slowly started recounting her tale. However, there was a problem with that. When Senior Devil Emperor used the World Piercer to create that crimson crack in the wall of primal chaos, the effort nearly drained it of all of its power. It was so drained that it wouldn't even be able to perform the jump that we just did more than a few times. This didn't surprise Xianxia either. The God Realm had known about the crimson crack for several years, and that was because it took the heaven-smiting Devil Emperor that long to cut open the wall of primal chaos. During those years, the World Piercer had definitely expended all the energy it could before it needed to recharge itself again. And the cycle of being used and recharging its energy went on until the heaven-smiting Devil Emperor finally broke through. Hence, when she finally did manage to break through to the other side of the wall of primal chaos, the World Piercer was in an entirely drained state, to the point where it had even been significantly overtaxed. Furthermore, in the current primal chaos dimension, there was no doubt the World Piercer would take a very long time to recover its strength, for the same reason as the Sky Poison Pearl and the Eternal Heaven Pearl. This wasn't all. Its artifact spirit was also on the brink of death after many years of being in a state of constant release, and it fell into a deep sleep after the World Piercer had broken through the wall of primal chaos. Senior Devil Emperor said that the current aura in the primal chaos realm was too thin and turbid, and it was possible that the World Piercer's artifact spirit might never wake up in such an environment. She even said that it was very possible that it may die while still in its state of slumber. Xianxia. Shui Meiyan's words made him recall the previous poison spirit that dwelled within the Sky Poison Pearl. Even though the Sky Poison Pearl had managed to recover its poison origin in the Azure Cloud continent, its poison spirit had already died. As such, the rate at which the Sky Poison Pearl regained its ability to poison was incredibly slow. It was only when He Ling became its new poison spirit that the Sky Poison Pearl's power began to properly recover. In fact, it had even managed to unleash its heaven-wounding thought-severing poison on the Brahma Monarch God realm a few years ago, an act that had brought the mighty King realm to its knees. If the needle spirit of the World Piercer remained in its deep sleep or died, then the power of the World Piercer would undoubtedly remain dormant forever. Perhaps He Ling's spirit could also merge with the World Piercer. However, he instantly quashed that thought the moment it surfaced in his head. No, that wouldn't do. He Ling could perfectly control the Sky Poison Pearl as she was a wood spirit, but taking over the Eternal Heaven Pearl had dramatically increased the burden on her soul. In spite of that, she still tried to merge her spirit into the primordial seal of life and death on a regular basis, even when it was clear that it was hurting her. Given her willingness to sacrifice herself for him no matter what the cost, this World Piercer. Wait a minute. The needle's spirit was asleep, it wasn't dead. I'm getting ahead of myself here. However, Senior Devil Emperor did not want the World Piercer to accompany her into her eternal exile from the primal chaos, so she handed it over to me before she left. Is it because you have the stainless divine soul? Xianxia asked. This was the unique trait, a blessing from the heavens themselves that only Shui Meiyan had. Yes, Shui Meiyan nodded her head. The World Piercer was born in the core of the primordial universe, so she said these words to me. Only your stainless divine soul, birthed by the primordial energies of this universe, can nurture and temporarily awaken the needle spirit that slumbers within the World Piercer. The stainless divine soul was then used as a medium to connect to the needle spirit which had been roused from its slumber for a little while, and I would then proceed to use my own strength to forcibly activate the World Piercer's dimensional powers. Emotion filled Xianxia's face as he said, "So you're saying that you managed to switch the blue pole star with another planet using this method?" She had used the stainless divine soul to temporarily awaken the needle spirit slumbering within the World Piercer, before using it again to connect with the roused needle spirit. After that, she had used her own power to forcibly activate the World Piercer's dimensional power to accomplish this huge spatial swap. If completely destroying two planets was as hard as lifting a boulder, completely swapping the locations of two planets was as hard as lifting a mountain. This enormous endeavor had definitely exhausted most of Shui Meiyan's soul power and profound power. However, the one that had borne the brunt of the burden had undoubtedly been the already weak needle spirit. No wonder Shui Meiyan had said that this was a one-off divine miracle. Unless the needle spirit recovered enough of its strength, it might not even be possible to try to forcefully pull this stunt off again. In fact, even attempting to do this again would inevitably result in the complete destruction of the needle spirit. Given the current state that the primal chaos dimension was in, The needle's spirit could perish at any given moment. Even if it could make a complete recovery while resting within Shui Meiyan's divine soul, there was no telling how long that would take. Shui Meiyan continued, "Swapping the locations of two planets is the very limit of what the world piercer can do in the current universe. This was something that Senior Devil Emperor told me after she passed it to me. At that time, I had never thought that there would actually be a day where I had to, and I had never dreamed that it would come so quickly either." Yun Qi's heart throbbed with a gentle warmth as he stared at Shui Meiyan, but he did not know how to put this feeling into words. "Tu found a replacement for the blue pole star very early on?" Yun Qi asked. This felt just like when Shui Meiyan had used the illusory glazed imagery jade to secretly record the truth of what happened back then, before the God Emperors had betrayed him. She had told him that it was because her stainless divine soul could predict danger to a certain extent. "Senior Devil Emperor told me something back then, and I still remember each and every one of her words like it was yesterday." Shui Meiyan started to speak slower as she repeated Jia Yuan's words. "The true devils have never been the devil race which live within the darkness. Instead, they exist within the depths of every living being's soul. Therefore, do not be so naive as to expect your kindness to be repaid in turn, and never ever underestimate the depths that people can stoop to." Yun Qi had also come to fully understand those words. Back then, he had found Chu Yuechen and his daughter, regained his power, and his friends, family, and lovers were all safe and sound. He had even managed to find Jasmine in the God realm in the end. As such, he had decided to return to the blue pole star and disappear from the God realm forever. Furthermore, the eternal heaven God Emperor, the person he had trusted and respected the most in the God realm, had even personally vowed in the most public of fashions to ensure that he would not be disturbed by anyone from the God realm. Everything seemed so beautiful and perfect at that moment, and he was deeply grateful to the protection and benevolence that life had shown to him thus far. In the end, it was this innocence of his that sent him hurtling into the deepest abyss. At first, I thought that the cruel misery that Senior Devil Emperor had endured during her years outside the primal chaos had naturally caused her to view everything from the bleakest and most cynical viewpoint. After that, I saw Big Brother Yun Qi slowly become the God-child Messiah that everyone revered and respected, and my heart was filled with joy. However, a strange unease started to grow in my heart. At that time, I didn't think that anything bad would happen to you. I also desperately hoped that all would be well, but the unease in my heart caused me to start thinking about the worst possible ending for you. As a result, I carefully used the illusory glazed imagery jade to secretly record the scenes of Big Brother Yun Qi saving the universe. At the same time, I also started looking for a planet that was similar to the blue pole star. Because, in the worst-case scenario that I had thought of, Big Brother Yun Qi's home planet, which was your greatest weakness and where your heart truly lay, would also be. Shui Meiyan suddenly stopped speaking. She didn't continue, but Yun Qi understood what she was saying. Yun Qi broke the awkward silence by saying, "Speaking of which, why did you know where the blue pole star was located? I don't remember ever bringing you there." Shui Meiyan's delicate head drooped slightly before she looked at Yun Qi and flashed him a sweet smile. "That is naturally because Senior Devil Emperor told me where it was. I also know that it was the planet that Senior Devil Emperor and Senior Heretic God created together in the far distant past." Yun Qi gave the softest of sighs. When he recalled the raw emotions the heaven-smiting Devil Emperor had shown when she saw the blue pole star once again, he found it hard to imagine what her reaction would be if she found out about everything that had transpired in recent years. In the ancient era, the heretic god and Jia Yuan had created the blue pole star together, and it had originally been situated in the north of the primal chaos, near where the current northern divine region was. After that, the war between the true gods and true devils broke out, and the heretic god shifted the blue pole star to the east of the primal chaos in order to protect it. However, the blue pole star had suffered severe damage during this process, causing most of its land to collapse. Only 3% of its landmass remained, with the remaining 97% being turned into ocean. And now, it had leapt through space once more to arrive in the south of the primal chaos. No one in this world, and that included all the living beings on the blue pole star, would ever dream that this tiny planet, which was as common as dust in the primal chaos realm, had actually leapt through space 3 times. It must have been very difficult to find a planet that was similar to the blue pole star, right? Yun Qi asked in a soft voice. "No," Shui Meiyin shook her head instead. In fact, the blue pole star's special characteristics actually made it the most simple of things. Oh, Yun Qi looked at her, his curiosity and confusion evident in his eyes. Shui Meiyin continued. Most planets are primarily made out of mountains and land, and these vast stretches of land would often be populated by complex and even unique geographical landmarks. Hence, if the blue pole star was one of these planets, it would have been extremely hard for me to find a similar planet in such a short period of time, and finding a planet that completely matched it would have been nearly impossible. However, the blue pole star has a very unique composition of 3% landmass and 97% water. From the outside, it looks like a pure blue planet, and even the small amount of landmass that does exist is completely disguised by the vast amount of water. As a result, I just needed to find a planet the same size as the blue pole star, which was mostly composed of water. Furthermore, the blue pole star doesn't exist within the plane of the God realm, and it is a lower realm planet that couldn't be more ordinary. Its aura is weak and turbid, and all of the elements on the planet are in harmony. So it was not only easier to find a similar planet, the turbulence that occurs from time to time in the energies of the universe also made it very hard for even people familiar with the planet to tell it from another one. Shui Meiyin's starry eyes curved slightly. These two factors were heaven's way of protecting the blue pole star. Yun Qi stared at Shui Meiyin dazedly. Back then, when his life had been a bed of roses and the future had been bright, he would never have imagined that there was a person who was quietly looking out for him, doing things for him, and sacrificing so much for him. Then when did you complete the swap between the blue pole star and the sky water star? Yun Qi's voice had unconsciously grown gentler, and his eyes had even started misting up with tears. As she stared into Yun Qi's emotion-filled eyes, Shui Meiyin whispered, "It was right after Senior Devil Emperor left, when you were hurt and betrayed by those you trusted in front of the wall of primal chaos, and agitated into unleashing your darkness profound energy. Before the time came to send off Senior Devil Emperor at the wall of primal chaos, I felt a deep terror emerge from within my stainless divine soul. That was also why my father, sister, and I stayed in the glazed light realm instead of venturing forth to the wall of primal chaos at that time. Soon, news arrived, and you had been declared a devil that all the king realms were trying to hunt down and kill. The worst-case scenario I had prepared for had truly occurred, and it happened with such breathtaking speed. Once I received the news, I left the glazed light realm without anyone's knowledge, and used the world piercer to teleport to the eastern divine region. Even though I had managed to use the stainless divine soul to rouse the incredibly frail needle spirit within the world piercer, I was still not convinced that I could accomplish a divine miracle like swapping the location of two planets in the universe. However, destiny must have definitely been quietly protecting Big Brother Yun Qi, because I managed to succeed. The only differences after I made the swap were some deviations in where both planets had once been, something that no one would be able to detect unless they already knew what had happened. "No," Yun Qi said with a faint smile. "It was your pure heart and soul that moved that temperamental and fickle thing called fate." Shui Meiyin's starry eyes grew a little vacant as she continued her story. "After that, I returned to the glazed light realm and someone soon arrived and handed you over unconscious to Big Sister. After that, Yun Qi knew better than anyone what happened next. He woke up, heard that the blue pole star's location had been exposed by the eternal heaven god realm and that many god emperors and realm kings were already making their way there. He disregarded everything else and used the vanishing moon celestial palace to rush over to the blue pole star, before he personally witnessed the moon god emperor destroying the blue pole star with a single slash. "Big Brother Yun Qi," Shui Meiyin said as she stepped forward and weakly grasped Yun Qi's hand. Her eyes were misted over with tears as she continued. "At that time, I wasn't able to keep you from rushing over here, nor was I able to tell you that it wasn't the real blue pole star. I understand everything," Yun Qi said as he gripped her hand tightly. "No," Shui Meiyin shook her head. "What I'm trying to say is that I knew that you had a void illusion stone with you, so I knew that you'd be able to escape no matter how dangerous the situation became. More importantly at that time, I wanted you to personally witness the destruction of the blue pole star. I knew that doing that to you was the cruelest thing to do in the world, but... Yun Qi shook his head vigorously as he folded the shivering girl into a tight embrace. He closed his eyes and suppressed the wild beating of his heart as he crooned to her in a gentle voice. "No, you didn't make a mistake. You didn't do anything wrong. You were the person who saved the blue pole star, saved my home, saved my family and friends. You were the one who saved my everything. If Shui Meiyin had told him in advance that the planet that had been destroyed was not the blue pole star, then he would not have fallen into an abyss of pain and despair. And even if he still fled to the northern divine region, the worry, longing, and fear he would have always felt for his home would have prevented him from growing so rapidly. He would have never truly been able to abandon and give up his home, family, friends, and lovers. The only way he could truly become strong was if he was robbed of all his weaknesses and attachments and plunged into an endless abyss of despair. All of the weakness and hesitance in his heart had to be purged, and any sympathy and kindness he may have shown toward his enemies had to be killed. The only way he would truly be reborn and quickly ascend to the peak of the universe was for him to crazily pursue strength within that boundless abyss of hatred and vengeance. It was only like this that he would no longer have to worry about any threats once he regained what he had lost. What Shui Meiyin had given him was true rebirth and a shadowless future. In fact, one could even say that she had saved him. Meiyin. His arms tightened around her as his voice turned soft and gentle. When he opened up his mouth to speak again, every word came from the bottom of his heart. How can I ever repay you for everything? As it turned out, there was really such a thing as a debt of gratitude that could not be repaid in one's life. It was a debt that he couldn't repay with 10 or even 100 lives. Shui Meiyin fiercely shook her head. It seemed as if she wanted to say something, but the only thing that came from her lips were hoarse sobs that she wasn't able to stifle. Perhaps she was crying because she felt guilty over letting Xianxia experience such pain and despair. Or perhaps it was because of the touching words that Xianxia had whispered to her in such a warm and gentle fashion. Whatever it was, her slender shoulders continued to shudder as her tears fell like spring rain and quickly drenched the front of Xianxia's shirt. It went on and on and on. Meiyin had been trying her best to stop herself from crying all this while, but as her shoulders started to tremble, the dam completely burst. She kept trying to clench her teeth or bite down on her lower lip, but nothing worked. "All right, don't cry, Xianxia consoled her in a soft and gentle voice. It hadn't been an easy task for Shui Meiyin to stop his tears, but now she suddenly ended up crying herself. Woo-woo." Xianxia didn't say anything else. He only hugged her tightly, and he wouldn't let her go ever again. He knew that Shui Meiyin was also giving vent to her emotions. She had been keeping them bottled up in her heart all this while, and there was no way she could confide in anyone else either. It must have been a huge burden and torture for her. Furthermore, every single teardrop that was falling from her eyes right now was shed because of him and for him. She cried for a full 15 minutes before she finally managed to stop her weeping. However, when she turned her delicate head up to look at Xianxia, her starry eyes were still filled with tears that had yet to fall. As he bent his head to stare straight into Shui Meiyin's reddened eyes, he chuckled to himself and said, "If your big sister were to see you now, she'd definitely come straight at me with her jade rivulet sword." HMPH, my big sister is really gentle. There's no way she'd do that. "Ha ha," Shui Meiyin protested as she giggled. "Besides, you're the grand and mighty devil master who would dare to swing a sword at you." Her fingers lightly tapped against Xianxia's chest as she said with teary eyes. However, big brother Xianxia's chest has become really warm now. It's not like a cold block of ice anymore. That's the reason why I wasn't willing to let go. He. Xianxia himself could very clearly sense that his blood was no longer as cold as ice. But Shui Meiyin's finger suddenly stopped tapping his chest as it gently nestled against his robes. She spoke in a soft and gentle voice. "Big brother Xianxia, you can only give this warmth to me and the people that you care about. As for your enemies and the threats that you must eliminate, you must still be the pitiless and cruel devil master, okay?" "All right." Xianxia gave a heavy nod of his head. "This was also one of the reasons why you were so conflicted with your decision, correct?" "Yeah." Shui Meiyin's voice fell to a hush as she continued. "I had originally wanted to tell you everything after you beat the Dragon God realm and cleaned up all of the remaining threats. I was afraid that if I told you too soon, you would start acting rashly and end up exposing the blue pole star to danger. I was also afraid that your hatred and resentment would disperse once you found out, and you wouldn't be as ruthless as you used to be. I was even afraid that your worries and attachments would start to mess with your decision-making process. However, the method you used to deal with the Southern Sea God realm caused my blood to run cold. Furthermore, your order to attack the Dragon God realm was far too reckless and sudden. I was convinced that your confidence and determination to face the Dragon God realm was due to some extremely cruel method you possessed. A method that would exact an equally cruel price on yourself. Xianxia was unable to deny those words. I understand, Xianxia said with a heart filled with guilt. Don't you worry, whether it's the Dragon God realm or the Western Divine region, I will do my very best to protect myself while fighting them. I will no longer take such dangerous risks anymore. Now that it had come to this, he obviously understood why Shui Meiyin had wanted to tell him everything before he launched that attack on the Dragon God realm. She hoped that he would stop recklessly putting his life on the line once he saw the blue pole star again, and that he would start thinking about his own self-preservation once more so that he could reunite with them once everything was over. Shui Meiyin still ended up conflicted about whether she should tell him even when they were about to leave the Seven-Star realm, and their encounter with Jin Yue had clearly made her lean toward continuing to hide it. However, fate had decided that they would meet Xia Yuanba, who had come to the God realm to find Xianxia today. Even if it is to use the rest of my life to repay my little Meiyin, I will make sure that I'll live a good, long life from now on, Xianxia said in a half-joking manner. Shui Meiyin looked at him pensively before suddenly saying, Big brother Xianxia, if you really want to repay me, can you just promise me 3 things? Xianxia was taken aback by the request at first, but when he looked into Shui Meiyin's starry eyes, which were trembling with a strange light, he slowly nodded his head and said in an extremely serious voice, All right, I'll agree to anything, no matter what it is. This was an extremely solemn vow that he had made from his heart, because the debt he owed Shui Meiyin was far too great. Even if he slaved away his entire life, he wouldn't ever be able to repay it, so what were 3 small promises? Shui Meiyin wiped away the tears on her face as her expression turned solemn as well. The first thing I want Big Brother Xianxia to promise me is that no matter what you encounter in the future, even if it is more dreadful than the traumatic events of the past, even if it plunges you into an even deeper despair, you must be kind to yourself. Don't ever allow your hatred and resentment to harm you and cause you to risk your life in hopes that you will die. Because Shui Meiyin, who had just calmed down a moment ago, started to crinkle her nose again as tears welled up in her eyes. Your life and your well-being no longer belong to you alone. In this world, there is someone who cares about you and loves you far more than you could ever imagine. For your sake, she truly was able to give up everything for you, even if it is for the sake of not letting them down. You can never throw yourself into that deep abyss again. Because even if they truly leave you forever, to them, you being able to live on happily is their eternal wish, even after they have departed. Tears fell from her face like a squall as she said those words. Xianxia's heart throbbed violently. He stretched out a hand to gently brush away the remaining tears on the girl's face. After that, he said in a gentle but solemn voice, All right, I will remember every single word that you just said. I will never ever behave that way again. I promise for the rest of my life. What reason did he have to hold on to hatred and resentment if there was a person who was willing to do such much for him? Shui Meiyin waited until she could compose herself again before she continued. The second thing I want Big Brother Xianxia to promise me is that he will treat the rest of the universe with kindness and compassion once he defeats the Dragon God realm and becomes the new ruler of the universe. Xianxia wasn't the least bit surprised by this request. He had already more or less discerned it when he had spent time with Shui Meiyin in the Seven-Star trade region. Even though the Dragon God realm bit the hand that fed them by betraying Xianxia, and the Dragon Monarch can't be forgiven for his act of killing your master. The Dragon God realm has been the best ruler that the God realm could have asked for over its history. It's done so well that no other king realm could ever hope to replace it. The Dragon God realm has unrivaled power, and it could easily quash any of the other king realms if it so desired. However, the Dragon Gods are a proud race that despise bullying the weak. Though they do not fear battle, they have never been the instigators of war. As a result, they've never used power to plunder others, despite the fact that they could easily do so. The other king realms also had no choice but to curb their own excesses and tyranny, since the Dragon God realm ruled over them with a watchful eye. If it had been the Brahma Monarch God realm or Southern Sea God realm who had the power to rule the God realm instead, you can well imagine how dreadful that would have been. Xianxia listened to her words sincerely. Even though he hated the Dragon God realm to the core and would never spare Long Bai's life, he could not deny Shui Meiyin's words. For the past 1,000,000 years, the Dragon God Realm had indeed been the best candidate to rule the God Realm. This seven-star realm is an extremely small corner of the God Realm, but they also know the truth about what happened because of the images broadcast from the Eastern Divine region. They know that Big Brother Xianxia was hurt and betrayed, and that you were the one who actually saved all of them. However, with the invasion of the Northern Divine region, the very first reaction they will have is extreme fear and unease. As you have seen, some of them have even abandoned their ancestral homes and fled. The star realms have also become chaotic and lawless. Some of them may very well collapse before too long. No one in the God realm can imagine a world where the devils reign above them, and they are all deathly afraid of it coming to be. Everything that is happening now is unavoidable. They are all things that have to come to pass. But she affectionately looked at Xianxia. I believe that, in a future not so far from now, Big Brother Xianxia, who will have become the new sovereign of the universe, will do an even better job than the Dragon God realm, right? Xianxia slowly stretched out a hand and stared at his own palm. Back when he had died in the Star God realm and had been reborn in the profound Sky continent, he had gone through a period of gloom and despair. However, he had also met Chu Yuechen and Yun Wuxin, which helped him step out from the gloom and into a never-ending light. Back when Yun Wuxin had sacrificed her own talent and risked her life to save him, he had stared at his hands just like this, and vowed to never again stain those hands which he used to hug and protect his daughter in blood and sin. That had caused a great change in his heart and temperament. Warmth and kindness had taken hold of his heart and soul, and he had even felt revulsion towards his past actions. Sin and bloodshed used to be a regular part of his lifestyle, but he began to reject them wholesale as the hatred, malice, resentment, and violence in his heart unconsciously started to wither away. One memory struck him at this moment. When he had returned to the God realm, Xia Qingyu had pinned him down with a single question. Did your heart become soft because of your daughter? Not too long after that happened, his heart went to the other extreme, and it went to the most extreme of extremes. Since then, his hands had been stained in more blood and sin than words could ever describe, and he would never ever be able to wash them clean. All right, Xianxia said in the softest of voices as he looked away and he clenched his hands. All of this slaughter, blood, and sin are my responsibility. I once wished to plunge this world into eternal darkness, to turn this filthy God realm into a dark purgatory. But now, even if just for the sake of not letting this boundless sin touch them, I will bestow light upon this world. But that will only be after everything has come to an end. Before that, everyone who needs to die, all possible threats, must be completely and totally eliminated. Even if I have to steep myself in 1,000 times more sin than I already have, I can never allow the mistakes of the past to repeat themselves again. Then what is the third thing? He asked as a faint smile began to form on his face. However, the look of sudden pain and loss in her eyes caused that smile to disappear even before it was fully birthed. You need to atone together with me. Atone? Xianxia asked in puzzlement and shock. His body was stained with far too much sin already. In fact, the number of people who had died because of him had already grown beyond counting. Atone together for her sin. Shui Meiyan's delicate head sagged as she whispered. The sky water star that replaced the blue pole star. It wasn't a dead planet. Xianxia. If the planet that replaced the blue pole star didn't have any trace of blood or countless souls being dispersed into the ether after its destruction, the people there would have immediately detected an anomaly. So the sky water star was also a planet teeming with life. Its aura of life was nearly as dense as the blue pole star. Every living being on the planet, down to the smallest blade of grass and the tiniest insect, were completely innocent. However, because of my selfishness, all of them were. It isn't your fault, Xianxia cut her off. They were killed by the Moon God Emperor and they died because of me. You merely teleported them there. None of this has anything to do with you. Before they had left the Northern Divine region, he had destroyed 3 entire star realms in the Northern Divine region in order to frame the eternal Heaven God realm and create an excuse to attack the Eastern Divine region. At that time, his heart hadn't even rippled once throughout that entire undertaking. He hadn't even felt a single ounce of guilt or hesitation. However, Shui Meiyan was different from him. She was the only person who possessed the stainless divine soul in the universe. She was of exalted birth and near unparalleled potential, and her profound cultivation had reached the exalted heights of level 7 of the Divine Master Realm. However, one couldn't even smell the hint of blood on her, and her eyes always seemed to glow with pure and unblemished starlight. Even though she had already reached the late stages of the Divine Master Realm, it was very possible that she had never killed anyone before and had never stained her hands with sin even once. Yet she now bore the guilt of killing an entire world because of him. Shui Meiyin didn't nod or shake her head. She merely mumbled these words in a very soft and drowsy voice. "Let's atone together, okay?" Yun Qi tried very hard to think of something to say, but he came up empty in the end. No matter how many words he used, no matter how he tried to console, advise, or thank her, no matter what sort of guilt he tried to bear on her behalf, all of it seemed incomparably empty in front of Shui Meiyin's starry eyes. As such, Yun Qi could only gently nod his head. Could you atone for the sin of killing a man by saving 100 more? He didn't know, and he didn't think that anyone else could answer that question either. If 100 people weren't enough, then he'd save 1,000. If 1,000 weren't enough, then he'd save 10,000. He could go to the deepest of hells, bear a boundless amount of sin on his back, but he would never allow Shui Meiyin to feel the way he did. She agreed to all three things. After that, Shui Meiyin closed her eyes and her tear-stained face seemed to be a lot more at ease. "I'll fulfill them, each and every one of them," Yun Qi vowed solemnly. Shui Meiyin managed to make a cute little pout before she finally laughed in a voice that was still a little stuffy from crying. Thanks, big brother Yun Qi. There's no need to thank me." Yun Qi grinned as he pinched the tip of her pretty white nose. "If we're really going to be thanking each other, even 1,000,000 years wouldn't be enough for me to say all of those thank yous." Shui Meiyin. Today was undoubtedly yet another rebirth for Yun Qi. A long period of time passed before the two of them finally managed to compose themselves. They didn't linger in the 7-star realm any longer. Instead, they immediately shot into the air and returned the way they came, back to the 10 Directions deep sea realm. Even though they could have used the world piercer to arrive there in the very next instant, it was a waste of its remaining power, a power that might very well prove invaluable in the near future. They also didn't want to leave any traces of teleportation near the 7-star realm. Now that I think about it, the timing with which you produced your illusory glazed imagery jade was simply sublime. It caused the battle lines that the Eastern Divine region had just begun to form to completely collapse. Everything fell into place like a pile of dominoes after that. Also, even though you were struggling with this decision all this while, the timing with which you chose to tell me everything couldn't have been more perfect. At least that's the way that I see it. Yun Qi grasped Shui Meiyin's hand gently as a faint smile appeared on his face. However, the meaning behind this smile was completely different from what it had been for the last few years. "I was actually really worried just now, but now that I see the look on Big Brother Yun Qi's face, I believe that we will definitely attain the best possible ending in the future," Shui Meiyin said with a happy smile. "That's right, let me make a guess right now," Yun Qi suddenly said. "Did you borrow the spatial divine power of the world piercer to secretly scout out the northern divine region from the very beginning?" A surprised look appeared on Shui Meiyin's face, but she didn't deny his words immediately. She grinned at him and replied, "Why do you ask? About 1.5 years ago, we were laying the groundwork to create the excuse we needed to attack the eastern divine region. At that time, Kai Weiao lured Zhou Xuzi to the border of the northern divine region, and I killed Zhou Qingchen in front of him. After that, the Devil Queen told me a very strange thing. She said she sensed an aura flash past us during that confrontation, and she was utterly convinced that she wasn't mistaken. However, she couldn't find that aura again, no matter how much she swept the area with her spiritual senses." Yun Qi glanced at Shui Meiyin. "The Devil Queen possesses a very unique devil soul, a soul strong enough to cause the dragon soul of the strongest dragon god to collapse. But she wasn't able to find the aura that she had already sensed again. This was something she simply couldn't accept for a very long period of time. In fact, I don't think she's quite accepted it even now. Now that I think about it, that aura most likely came from you. After you discovered that she had sensed you, you instantly used the power of the world piercer to teleport away. If that's the case, even the Devil Queen wouldn't be able to find you. Am I right?" Even though he was posing it as a question, Yun Qi was absolutely convinced that he was right. Because this was the only way that aura could have suddenly vanished from Kai Weiao's spiritual senses without a single trace. There was no other possibility he could think of. Hee. Shui Meiyin suddenly giggled. She shifted her eyes away and looked to the front. "I got caught by Big Brother Yun Qi. Yup, that was me. It's just that I couldn't reveal myself at that time, so I immediately fled the moment I was discovered." "Just as I had thought," Yun Qi said with a smile on his face. Let me make another guess. Long Bai, you were the one who lured him away, right? Long Bai just so happened to leave the Dragon God realm a few days before the Northern Divine Region launched their invasion of the Eastern Divine Region, and he still hadn't returned yet. He had already confirmed that this had nothing to do with Kai Waya or Kaianai Yinger. They definitely wanted to do it, but they simply didn't have the means. As a result, the only person who would be cognizant of the timing of the Northern Divine Region's invasion and be able to use a special method to lure Long Bai to the God realm of absolute beginning right before then was Shui Meiyin. After all, she had just confessed that she would occasionally use the World Piercer to spy on the situation developing inside the Northern Divine Region. She had even been able to do it without being caught. Big brother Yun Qi is right again, Shui Meiyin simply confessed. At that time, I thought that the Dragon God realm would pose the greatest threat to your plans. It was the greatest unknown variable that could easily have turned things around for the Eastern Divine Region. Furthermore, since Long Bai has absolute and unquestioned authority in the Dragon God realm, his disappearance would mean that the Dragon God realm would most likely stay put, unless you directly invaded the Western Divine Region. However, it seems like Big Brother Yun Qi isn't the least bit afraid of the Dragon God realm. Did I do something unnecessary? Yun Qi smiled and shook his head. Before the events of today, I was eagerly awaiting my meeting with Long Bai, but now, I realized that you luring him away was for the best. If not, we'd be facing an utterly different situation right now. Just thinking about it sends a shudder down my spine. As he looked at Shui Meiyin's profile, his heart throbbed with emotion, and he said, Meiyin, I'm really lucky to have you in my life. They had first met when she was only 15. It had been during one of the rounds of the Profound God Convention's conferred God battle. When faced off against her terrifyingly strong, stainless divine soul, he had no choice but to use a despicable method to attain victory. He thought that she would fiercely hate and despise him because of that, but she had instead become infatuated with him, to the point where she would simply ignore her elder sister's advice and her father's wrath. This infatuation of hers had also been a huge headache for him back in the day. Amazingly enough, this love hadn't dimmed one bit during the 3,000 years she had spent in the eternal Heaven-Defying realm. And now it had turned his destiny around and saved his heart, soul, and everything dear to him. He did not dare to imagine what the situation would be like if he had never met her, if he hadn't been fortunate enough to gain this wholehearted love of hers. Then what method did you use to lure Long Bai into the God realm of absolute beginning for so long, to the point where he still isn't willing to come out to this day? Yun Qi asked. He was extremely curious as to how Shui Meiyin had accomplished this feat. Hesitance appeared in Shui Meiyin's eyes before she said, I used a very special method that's a bit hard to explain. If Big Brother Yun Qi really wants to know, you can personally ask Long Bai after you've gallantly beaten him. Oh right, there's something that I have to give to Big Brother Yun Qi. Perhaps Shui Meiyin was trying to avoid this question she wasn't willing to answer, but she looked as if she had suddenly recalled something as she stopped and held her hands up toward Yun Qi. A weak light faintly flashed from them before a floating black stone tablet appeared in front of her. It was a square-shaped stone tablet that was 3 feet wide and as black as night. A row of strange and profound-looking runes were inscribed on this tablet. An indescribably mysterious aura that barely seemed to exist radiated from the tablet, and it caused Yun Qi's soul to violently shudder. This feeling. He reached out to touch the stone tablet, his fingers tracing the lines of those strange and bizarre runes. These unique strokes, this strange and wondrous feeling, the divine text of absolute beginning. Could this be? Yun Qi's head whipped up violently to look at Shui Meiyin. His eyes were filled with shock as he asked, was this something that the heaven-smiting Devil Emperor passed to you as well? Yes, Senior Devil Emperor told me to pass it to you at the appropriate time, Shui Meiyin replied. Yun Qi's heart started to ripple agitatedly. The divine text of absolute beginning. The thing that the heaven-smiting Devil Emperor had passed to Shui Meiyin was the fragment of the ancestral divine art that she had owned. The profound art that was also known as the world-defying heaven manual in this current era. In the ancient era, heaven-punishing divine Emperor Mo-E set a trap for the heaven-smiting Devil Emperor because of this fragment of the world-defying heaven manual. That was the event that caused Jai Yuan to be banished from the primal chaos dimension in the first place. He had always assumed that this fragment had followed the heaven-smiting Devil Emperor back to the void beyond the wall of primal chaos, but it turned out that she had passed this to Shui Meiyin as well. Strange, why didn't she just hand it over to me? Why did she have to pass it to me through Shui Meiyin? A suspicion flashed through his mind. He stretched out a hand and grabbed hold of the stone tablet that was floating in the air. Once he combined this with the other two fragments he was holding, he would possess the unified, world-defying heaven manual, the whole ancestral divine art. No one had ever managed to complete it before. This was true even in the era of gods. This was truly a historic moment, something that had never happened in the entire history of the primal chaos. As he suppressed the wildly surging emotions in his heart, he voiced his suspicions to Shui Meiyin. When the heaven-smiting devil emperor handed it over to you, did she leave you any special instructions? Shui Meiyin paused for a moment before replying. She said that she would rather that this thing had never come into her possession in the first place. Xianxia, he had not obtained the answer he desired, but the heaven-smiting devil emperor's words contained a boundless sorrow and regret that no outsider could ever understand. The law of nothingness that Xianxia had grasped had come from the two fragments of the world-defying heaven manual he already possessed. It was an extremely unique and vague enlightenment, because Xianxia didn't even understand how he attained this enlightenment in the first place, nor did he know just how much of this law he truly understood. Now that he had unified the world-defying heaven manual, the completed ancestral divine art might be able to help him delve into the deeper mysteries of the law of nothingness. However, he could not read the divine text of absolute beginning. The only person in the universe who could do so was Xiao Lingxi. Unfortunately for him, he wasn't able to reveal himself to her at this time. Xianxia put away the black stone tablet and put all thoughts of the world-defying heaven manual and the ancestral divine art out of his mind. After that, he turned to Shui Meiyin and said, "Meiyin, after we return to the deep sea realm, can you promise me one thing?" When they returned to the 10 Directions deep sea realm, Xianxia thought that the ocean blue sky was as pretty as a picture as his eyes and soul drank in its splendor. The world seemed so much more colorful and vibrant to him now. The 3 Yama ancestors rushed toward Xianxia at the highest speed the moment they sniffed out his aura. They reverentially stopped in front of him and greeted him. "We welcome Master back to the realm." Xianxia was softly caressing the tricolored glazed sound stone around his neck, a warm and gentle smile on his face. The 3 Yama ancestors' voices caused him to look up at them reflexively, but the smile on his face was still there when he looked at them. The moment they saw that smile, the 3 Yama ancestors felt a violent shudder run down their spines. After that, they practically pissed themselves as they frantically prostrated themselves before Xianxia. Mao asked her, "Please do not be angry. This old slave deserves to die 1,000 deaths." Yan howled as he smashed his head against the ground. His crooked body was practically glued to the ground as he shook in terror. "This old slave repents. I beg for Master's forgiveness." Yan 2 was shaking even harder than Yan 1. "This old slave is incompetent and dull-witted. Since I have incurred Master's wrath, I fully deserve to die 1,000 times over. I beg Master to bestow his punishment upon this old slave. You mustn't become so angry that you hurt yourself." Yan 3 howled as his head banged off against the ground with the steady rhythm of a pounding hammer. Xianxia's lips twitched. He immediately realized that his faint smile had scared the 3 old men witless. "Rise!" After he let go of the glazed sound stone in an incredibly gentle manner, he flung a hand out and said, "Stop being eyesores and disturbing the peace. Go take a break somewhere." Xianxia immediately walked off after he said that. The 3 Yama ancestors scrambled to their feet as they stared at his shrinking figure with eyes that were as wide as saucers. Their brains simply couldn't process what had just happened. After he sent sound transmissions to Kai Weiao, Kai and Yinger, Keijai, and Yan Tianxiao, Xianxia stood in the center of the deep sea royal hall, closed his eyes, and whispered, "He Ling, prepare to open the eternal heaven divine realm." He Ling's excited voice very quickly rang out in his mind. "Master, you finally thought things through." "Yes," Xianxia said as he smiled and nodded his head. "Before today, I was only thinking of using the most violent and cruel method to rip Long Bai apart. Every day I had to wait was a torture because of my violent desire, and I wouldn't hesitate to pay any price to make that desire into a reality. But now, things have completely changed." As he spoke, a faint smile remained on his face, even when he mentioned the name Long Bai. The figures of all the people who had reappeared in his life once more floated up in his mind as he closed his eyes and said, "Now, I wouldn't mind if I had to wait 300 years, or even 3,000 years in the eternal heaven divine realm, much less a measly 3 years." because Long Bai and the Dragon God realm are no longer opponents that I will risk my life to defeat. Crack. The joints in his hands cracked as he clenched his fists. His voice was rich with malice and the promise of violence as he continued. I am going to use the safest possible method to smash him to death. It wasn't long before the core of the devil race gathered at the central hall once more. The first person to arrive was Xianxia. The way she looked, it was as if she was carrying a storm behind her. When Xianxia returned from the eastern divine region and learned that Xianxia and Shui Meiyan had left for the south without the three Yama ancestors, she had exploded like a volcano and beat the crap out of them. She would have traveled to the south to capture Xianxia and Shui Meiyan too if Kai Wao hadn't stopped her. It was why the three Yama ancestors were scared shitless and begged for mercy when Xianxia had smiled at them earlier. They thought that he was angry that they had pissed off his woman. When Xianxia felt Xianxia walking up to him like a volcano, he turned around and shot her a warm smile. When did you come back? You're asking me, Xianxia said angrily. I can't believe you found the leisure to go on a trip with that girl at this time. Suddenly, she stopped talking and raised her eyebrows slowly. A while later, she said, something's not right with you. Is that so? Still smiling, Xianxia responded noncommittally before answering her grievances. There's nothing to worry about. Even without the three old monsters, there is no one in this world who can stop me from escaping. The Devil Queen and Xianxia overseeing the overall strategy, the Star Realms overseeing the war preparation themselves, and Kang Shishin keeping the southern divine region under control, I can afford to go missing once in a while. Xianxia's eyes narrowed even further. It was because Xianxia had taken the time to explain things to her. Previously, he would have just let out a cold snort and ignored her completely. Before Xianxia could figure out what was going on, Xianxia suddenly pulled a strand of hair hanging in front of her forehead to the back before saying gently, In the future, don't trouble yourself over such a small matter, okay? A flabbergasted Xianxia blanked out for a second before taking half a step away from Xianxia like she was electrocuted. She then stared and scanned him with her spiritual perception from head to toe. She knew Xianxia well enough to identify every strand of hair on his body, and yet she still found it difficult to believe that the man in front of her was truly Xianxia. A person's subconscious was impossible to fake. Any change to one's subconscious would also affect their emotions and actions. The destruction of the blue pole star had completely changed Xianxia. The realization that it was unharmed had caused a transformation that was just as drastic. That was why he seemed like a completely different person to someone who knew him so well like Xianxia. Pausing for a moment after realizing that his action was completely at odds with how he usually acted, he sucked in a deep breath, gathered his dark, profound energy, and tried to return to his dark and brooding self. However, the only images that he managed to conjure in his mind were his parents, his daughter, Lingxi, Kei, Yuechen, Kangyu, Linger, and more. The mere knowledge that they were alive and well filled his blood with red-hot love. He was able to school his expression in the end, but that darkness and hatred that seemed to seep out of the deepest depth of his soul, he just couldn't find it anymore no matter what he tried. It was at this moment the barrier covering the central hall was unlocked, and Kai Wao, Keijai, and Shui Meiyan arrived and entered the chamber together. Behind them, Xianxia was just dropping down from the sky as well. Xianxia allowed herself to be distracted for now and shot Shui Meiyan a look. The latter simply giggled and stuck out her tongue at her. It looks like our devil master has something urgent to announce, said Kai Wao as she approached Xianxia. However, just like Xianxia, she immediately noticed that something was off with him and stared at him for a long time. Your Magnificence, I have ordered the men to gather the divine crystals, divine jade, and highest quality divine swords you wanted. Your will be done in 6 hours at most, Xianxia reported the moment he arrived. Xianxia nodded acknowledgingly and said, Very good. Why the sudden mobilization of these resources? And why would you need the swords for? Xianxia asked with a frown. In preparation for the upcoming war, they had been using all the resources they plundered from the Eternal Heaven Realm, Brahma Monarch Realm, Chunyuan Realm, Purple Micro Realm, Southern Sea Realm, and more to empower various profound artifacts, formations, weapons, and more. I need them for my cultivation, Xianxia replied simply. His reply stunned everyone except Shui Meiyan. His next words shocked them even more. Also, the assault on the Dragon God Realm will be delayed for 10 days, Xianxia said slowly. Ah, wah. Xianxia lifted his head and stared at the devil master in confusion. 8 days had passed since Yun Qi declared of an all-out assault on the dragon god realm. Right now, everyone was doing their utmost to prepare for D-Day. Their spirit, power, morale, and even their devilish blood were burning like never before. However, if they were to delay the assault now, that energy was sure to falter drastically no matter how sound the reason was. Even if that passion was rekindled, it would surely be weaker than it was before. Why? Kai Wyo asked in her seductive voice as usual. Yun Qi was unsurprised by their reaction. He explained, the Eternal Heaven Pearl we acquired from the Eternal Heaven Realm now has enough power to activate the Eternal Heaven-Divine Realm one time. Therefore, I'm planning to use this chance to cultivate for a bit before we crush Dragon God Realm beneath our feet. A pause later, he explained in more detail, previously, the Eternal Heaven Pearl had used up all its power to activate the Eternal Heaven Divine Realm for 3,000 years. Although it has regathered a small shred of its power since, it is only enough to keep the Eternal Heaven Divine Realm active for 3 years, and its time compression is much weaker than before. Long story short, 3 years in Eternal Heaven Divine Realm is about 11 days in the normal world. Kai and I Yinger. Kai Wyo, Keijai, Shui Meiyin, number IC. Yan Tiangxiao's realization quickly turned into excitement. 3 years is nothing for most people, but your magnificence is the successor of the Devil Emperor herself. Naturally, you'll be able to make use of this time far better than us mortals do. Your might has already cowed the world when you are still at the Divine Sovereign Realm. Surely you'll be able to squash even the so-called Dragon Monarch like an ant if you are able to become a Divine Master during this time. However, just as he finished his sentence, he abruptly realized that the atmosphere wasn't quite what he expected it to be. A quick scan of his surroundings revealed to him that it was deathly silent for some reason. Kai and I Yinger and Kai Wyo exchanged a wordless glance with each other. Not long ago, Yun Qi couldn't wait even a day longer to make his move after becoming a level 10 Divine Sovereign at the Northern Divine region. Now he's delaying his assault on the Dragon God Realm to cultivate in the Eternal Heaven Divine Realm for 3 years. If either of them was slightly more hot-tempered than they were, they might have jumped to their feet, pointed a finger to his nose, and screamed at him. Where the fuck was this you when we asked you to stay just a couple years longer in the Northern Divine region? And why the fuck are you appearing now of all times? Something's wrong with him, Kai and I Yinger messaged Kai Wyo directly. The Devil Queen shot Shui Meiyin a thoughtful look before responding. Something must have happened between him and little Meiyin during the time they were gone. At least, it's probably not a bad thing. How many people can enter this Eternal Heaven Divine Realm? Keijai suddenly asked with a strange look in her eyes. 2, Yun Qi answered before looking at Shui Meiyin. I will be bringing Meiyin with me during these 3 years. Keijai's face immediately scrunched up. Can you add one more person? Yun Qi felt a tingle on his scalp, but he had no choice but to say the truth. Unfortunately, every new addition will have the amount of time the Eternal Heaven Divine Realm can hold. Keijai's chest heaved up and down. She was biting her lips as well. Yan Tiangxia was going to speak when a sudden chill suddenly turned his back into ice. He immediately bowed his head and kept his breathing shallow. HMPH? Keijai said with a disdainful snort. Eternal Heaven Pearl my butt. What a useless artifact. She turned around angrily and acted to leave. Keijai? However, Yun Qi reached her and caught her hand right as she gathered her profound energy. She tried to shake it off, but Yun Qi pulled her closer and wrapped his arms tightly around her body. He whispered beside her ears urgently, Keijai, it's not that I don't want to bring you into the Eternal Heaven Divine Realm, all right. There's a very special reason I chose Meiyin. What does that have to do with me? You don't need to explain anything to me. Keijai struggled hard, but this time Yun Qi refused to let go no matter what. Kai Wyo couldn't help but chuckle a little at the sight of the squirming duo. She decided to lend Yun Qi a hand and said, If I'm not mistaken, you intend to cultivate your soul in the Eternal Heaven Divine Realm, am I right? Correct. Yun Qi nodded without hesitation. I see. Kai Wyo fell into thought for a moment. She was starting to grow a real idea on what this special trump card of Yun Qi was about. In that case, little Meiyin is indeed the best choice. Not even my devil soul will be more helpful to you than her divine stainless soul. Amen. That's what Big Brother Yun Qi said to me too, Shui Meiyin added. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to help Big Brother Yun Qi yet, but you have nothing to worry about, Sister Keijai. I promise I won't disappoint you, and that I will do my best to help him. After her irritation was put down in a light-hearted manner, Keijai started growing self-conscious. She blushed a little and put on another token struggle before saying, "Enough, I know already. I wasn't trying to do anything. None of you needs to explain yourselves to me, let me go." However, Yun-Chi held her firmly before whispering into her ears again, "The next time the Eternal Heaven Pearl regains enough power, I'll move in with you however long you like, okay?" Keijai felt even weaker after hearing that. She lowered her head as much as she could and said in a mosquito's voice, "Seriously, let go already, there's people here." Keijai's waist was so thin and soft, it almost felt like he was holding the most wonderful sponge in the world, that Yun-Chi didn't want to let go. For the same reason, he didn't dare to put too much strength into his arms for fear of actually hurting her. So he declared like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I am the Devil Master and the future king of the God realm. Who dares to question me hugging my own wife? Kai Wao. Shui Meiyin, Yan Tianxiao, not sign Omega, not sign Ha." Kai and Yinger looked away. "Manhwa. Oh my." Kai Wao looked at her interestedly. "Where did you pick up that word?" "Like I know," Kai and Yinger huffed snappily. "Seriously though," Kai Wao muttered while narrowing her eyes into slits, "what on earth did he go through today? It's almost as if he came back with an entirely new soul." 10 hours later. The Eternal Heaven Pearl floated at the center of the deep-sea central hall while shining a pure white light. Due to many considerations, they ultimately chose to activate the Eternal Heaven Pearl at the heart of the entire realm, the deep-sea central hall. 7 different layers were laid down inside and outside the hall. Moreover, the 3 Yama ancestors would be guarding them day and night until they returned. He Ling's image appeared inside the Eternal Heaven Pearl. She pressed her hands together in front of her chest and focused on gathering the power of the Eternal Heaven Pearl. "Master, the Eternal Heaven Pearl has too little remaining energy, so I'm going to have to guide and channel them at all times while the Eternal Heaven Divine Realm is active. I won't be able to listen or transmit anything that might be happening outside." "I understand," Yun-Chi nodded. "Thank you for your hard work, He Ling. Also, my mastery of the Eternal Heaven Pearl isn't complete yet, so it's best if, no, you must ensure that no external force will disturb the Eternal Heaven Pearl during this time. Otherwise, there's a chance that the Eternal Heaven Divine Realm will collapse on itself. I don't have full confidence that I'll be able to prevent it from happening, and if a time and space distortion were to happen during this time, the consequences would be unthinkable." "I understand." Yun-Chi swept the 3 Yama ancestors a glance before adding, "I'm only going to repeat myself one time. Do not allow anyone to approach the barrier except the Devil Queen, Kainying, and Keijai, understand?" Yan Tianxiao dropped his head knowingly. "As you command, Master." The 3 Yama ancestors stared at Yan Tianxiao right after the hurried reply. They would have chased off Yan Tianxiao already if Yun-Chi hadn't said to kick him out now. Yun-Chi grabbed Shui Meiyin's hand and looked at Kai Wao. "I leave everything to you and Kainying. One more thing. Always watch out for Kang Shishin. You will pleasantly surprise us when you reappear, right?" Kai Wao said with a faint smile on her face. "HMPH, we hardly need the reminder." Kai and Yinger replied coldly before side-eyeing Shui Meiyin. 3 years is neither too long nor too short. If you're tired, feel free to use all those erotic techniques you used on me on your precious little girl. I'm curious to know if you'll break her or turn her into a proper. Ahem. Yun-Chi cut off Kai and Yinger loudly even as he sensed a sudden rise in temperature from Shui Meiyin's hand. "He Ling, activate the Divine Realm." He Ling's hands parted ways inside the Eternal Heaven Pearl. A white light surged and engulfed Yun-Chi and Shui Meiyin. A moment later, the aura of the 10 Directions Deep Sea Realm was replaced by the heavy, cold, and ancient aura of the Eternal Heaven Divine Realm. Zilei's feet were shrouded by white mist. Another 5 steps forward, and she would fall into a bottomless abyss that was said to be able to turn everything into nothing. The nameless sword behind her back had shedded its stillness and weight a while ago. It was still ancient, but it was now glaring in a way that caused most people to avert their eyes. The living, the dead, aura, strength, sound, light, soul, everything that is tangible or intangible in this world will turn into nothing in the abyss of nothingness, Jun Wuming said slowly. There were a lot of divine masters who, at the end of their lifetimes, tried to explore its secrets with all their power. However, all of them turned into nothing without exception. So no one knows what is at the bottom of the abyss of nothingness? Jun Zilei asked. No. Surprisingly, a bit of longing was shining through the murkiness of Jun Wuming's eyes. The unknown was often as dangerous as it was tempting. Jun Wuming's vitality had declined rapidly since the day he stopped Luo Changsheng with the imagination sword and saved Yun Qi. Today, he looked so old that anyone who saw him would be surprised by his appearance. "Why have you brought me here, master?" Jun Zile faced toward her master but averted her gaze immediately when she saw his face. At the same time, a bitter tang spread across her heart. She hated herself for acting willful all these years. Worse, she knew she would never be able to repay his kindness and love in full. The only thing she could do now was to keep a tight rein on her willfulness, accompany him on his final journey of life, and fulfill his last wishes. Cough, cough, cough. Jun Wuming pressed a hand to his chest, but his eyes were still staring at the abyss of nothingness. He explained, "A long time ago, I read about a power called nothingness from a book so ancient that its history was untraceable." Nothingness? Jun Zile repeated softly. "It is a name that doesn't exist in the current recognition of man. Most divine masters would simply ignore it if they saw this term. But now that I'm nearing the end of my life, I'm starting to believe that it truly exists. As you are aware, the sword that returns to nothing is the height of the sword sovereign style. Back then, this place is where I completed my understanding of the imagination sword." Jun Wuming closed his eyes and sat down with his legs crossed. "Layer, let go of your concerns, the world, your sword aura, and your sword intent. Try placing yourself inside a space of nothingness. I cannot explain what nothingness is to you. It all depends on you." Jun Zile obeyed her master's words and cleared out her mind quickly. However, she soon felt she could hear something from the lightless, soundless, and immaterial abyss of nothingness. It almost sounded like some sort of strange screaming. Am I mistaken? Nothing happened to the 10 Directions deep sea realm after Yun Qi and Shui Meiyin had entered the eternal Heaven-Defying realm. Everything was relatively peaceful. Kai Waiao had chosen to relay the Devil Master's order to delay the attack on the Dragon God realm via the Nirvana Devil voice after much consideration. As expected, everyone praised the wiseness behind the decision. Time passed quickly. 1 day turned into 2, 2 days turned into 5, and 5 days turned into 7 days. The 6 star gods of Star God realm have arrived. They are all with Mistress Keijai right now. Would you like to see them, Master? Hua Jin reported to Kai Waiao. No need. Kai Waiao stretched lazily. I have nothing to say to them. Back in the Eastern Divine region, they would have all died if little Keijai hadn't interfered. That favor and their guilt will drive them to work like a horse for little Keijai. How goes the Western Divine region? She asked. Hua Jin replied, It is as you have predicted, Master. The Dragon God realm is restless, but they've decided to stay their hand for now. The 5 realms are much quieter, but they are also preparing for war. It is so that they can mobilize their core forces quickly when the Dragon God realm rallies them to his cause. However, I suspect the actual number of mobilized forces will be smaller than expected. It's because all 5 realms are secretly conserving their strength while expecting the other 4 realms to do their best. Very good, you may leave. After Hua Jin left, Kai Waiao pressed a finger to her forehead and basked in silence. For some reason, she had been feeling ill at ease for the past couple days. However, she couldn't figure out why no matter how much she thought. Eternal Heaven Pearl, Eternal Heaven Divine Realm. HNNG PWAC. A shower of blood burst out of Yun Qi's mouth, his complexion turning from bright red to pale white in an instant. Big brother Yun Qi? Shui Meiyin rushed to his side and pressed both hands to his body. Are you okay? I'm fine, don't worry. Yun Qi waved his hand lightly while calming his energy and breath. It's fine, we still have a year or so. You will succeed, Shui Meiyin said consolingly. They had cultivated inside the eternal Heaven Divine Realm for 2 years. This wasn't the first time Shui Meiyin had entered the eternal Heaven Divine Realm. She could sense that it was much weaker than it used to be. However, the poor environment didn't affect Yun Qi's cultivation too much. It was because he could simply absorb energy from the divine crystals and jades he had plundered from multiple king realms. He didn't need to rely on his environment too much. At first, he thought that cultivating his profound energy would be much easier than cultivating his soul. However, his progress came to a sudden and complete halt when he hit the peak of level 10 Divine Sovereign. No matter what he tried, no matter how much energy he forcefully absorbed via the law of nothingness, he wasn't able to progress even an inch further. Yun Qi had never once encountered a bottleneck in his life as a profound cultivator. That record ended when he hit the border between Divine Sovereign Realm and Divine Master Realm and discovered that it was like a mountain that stretched on forever. He simply couldn't break through it no matter what he tried. In fact, he was getting the sense that his best efforts had failed to shake the mountain, even a tiny bit. Just now, he decided to throw all caution to the wind and punch through with everything he had. But all he got for his effort was a terrible injury. The bottleneck of Divine Master Realm is infamously difficult to break through. It took me 37 years to overcome it, and Father told me that my progress should be marked as a miracle in the history of God Realm. That is why you don't need to worry at all, Shui Meiyin continued in a gentle voice. However, Yun Qi declared with a frown, no, this isn't a bottleneck at all. He had his suspicions, but it was only after the forced attempt that he was finally able to confirm it. Eh? Shui Meiyin exclaimed. It's a restriction that was put down by the heretic god himself, I suspect, Yun Qi said heavily. His voice was full of complex emotions. A restriction, but why? Shui Meiyin asked in puzzlement. Still frowning, Yun Qi explained to her, there are 7 special gates in my heretic god profound veins. The first 5 gates, heretic soul, burning heart, purgatory, rumbling heaven, and hell monarch, can all be opened like normal, but the last 2 gates are sealed by a restriction as well. The heaven-smiting devil emperor had unsealed them for me. I thought that was it, but it looks like my profound cultivation is restricted as well. Moreover, the restriction was shaped in a way that eluded his senses until he tried to enter Divine Master Realm. The heaven-smiting devil emperor had unlocked the restriction on his gates, but not the restriction on his profound cultivation. He wondered if it was on purpose or not. As for why this restriction exists, Yun Qi's thoughts grew clearer after his breathing had calmed down. Meiyin, do you still remember the demonic beast rampage that affected more than half of God Realm? The one that began when the Crimson Crack appeared and lasted until the heaven-smiting devil emperor left. Of course I do, and that's not all. The weather and the elements became increasingly chaotic as well, Shui Meiyin replied. Then she exclaimed in realization, do you mean? Amen. I believe it's why the restriction was put down, Yun Qi said seriously. It's because the current primal chaos could no longer withstand the aura of gods. When the devil emperor first appeared, the living panicked. The heavenly way shivered, the elements had turned chaotic, and the natural order had threatened to crumble upon itself. Had the devil gods been allowed to return to primal chaos, they wouldn't have needed to destroy the world. The current law and order would have crumbled on its own, and the consequences, unpredictable. This was the biggest reason the heaven-smiting devil emperor ultimately chose to depart the world, Yun Qi said with a sigh. She didn't want to destroy the world the heretic god had protected until the end of his life, no, until now. So you're saying that your 6th and 7th gate and the realm above divine sovereign realm fall under the domain of true gods? Shui Meiyin asked. I'm not sure, Yun Qi replied, but it's definitely not a power this world can withstand right now. Back at Burning Moon God Realm, when he had sacrificed the star god's divine origin to activate the 6th gate, God Ash. For the first time, he had sensed the entire world trembling around him despite his blurring consciousness. Later on, Kaianai Yinger had told him that almost 1/4 of the northern divine region was shaking during those several breaths. At the southern sea god realm, the power erupting from the titanic sea god cannon was also a power that transcended the limits of primal chaos. It also caused a massive quake across most parts of the star realm. If a mere flash in the pan already threatened the world so, then prolonged use of a power that transcended the limits of the world might truly be more serious than he imagined. He was the last god to pass away. There's a chance he had lived long enough to see the fading of primal chaos aura, the formation of the new heavenly way order, and the stabilization of the elements. That is why he put down a restriction on his own profound inheritance, and stopped his inheritor from being able to open the 6th gate or break into Divine Master Realm. Obviously, there was no one in the world who knew his profound veins better than the heretic god himself. Yun Qi was just a level 10 divine sovereign right now, but Hell Monarch would put him on par with a level 10 divine master already. If he was allowed to break through to Divine Master Realm as well, then he would definitely exceed the world's limits. In other words, the restriction the heretic god left behind put him at exactly the maximum power the world could endure. There's a very low chance the heaven-smiting devil emperor missed this restriction, meaning that she probably came to the same conclusion and decision as the heretic god. She unlocked the gates so I would have an ultimate trump card to use in a life-or-death crisis, and because she knew it wouldn't last nearly long enough to damage the world's law and order. Does that mean there's absolutely no way to unseal it at all? Shui Meiyin asked worriedly. It was impossible to remove a creation god's restriction with the current world's power. However, Yun Qi smiled in a carefree manner before saying, "It's fine. Everything I have today is thanks to the heretic god. The restriction is both a limit and a gift, and it is only right that I accept it gratefully. Plus, I may have failed to overcome my upper limits, but my foundation has become far stronger than even I can imagine." So Yun Qi stopped thinking about breaking through to the next realm, rubbed his hands, and rose to his feet. He smiled again and said, "I can maintain Hell Monarch at all times now. That is enough. There's only a year left now. I'm going to spend all of it cultivating my soul." Shui Meiyin let out a sweet cry as Yun Qi roughly pushed her to the ground. "Ready? Let's begin." The flowing black fabric that was Shui Meiyin's dress was pulled all the way up to her chest. A pair of smooth, white legs that dazzled the eyes appeared into view, and 99,000 words went missing mysteriously because the hard disk exploded. "It's not my fault." At the same time, Western Divine Region, Dragon God Realm, Forbidden Land of Samsara. There was a small distortion in space, and a tall, imposing figure stepped out of it. His eyebrows were as straight as swords, and every line on his face was sharp and defined. His eyes glowed with divine power almost like the sun on a clear sky. When he appeared, the air within 500 meters around him froze, and the world dimmed and fell silent. Even the dead felt like they were worshipping the unparalleled Lord of the world. He was long by. The Dragon Monarch hadn't tried to conceal his presence when he returned to the Dragon God realm. Therefore, every Dragon God was instantly made aware of his existence. "Your Majesty, you finally returned. The Northern Divine Region is stronger than we could have imagined. The Eastern Divine Region was completely crushed. The Eternal Heaven Realm was massacred. The Moon God Realm was destroyed. The Brahma Monarch Realm submitted to the devils to preserve themselves. Yun Qi is now as strong as a God Emperor. The devil race possesses 3 old and terrifying monsters. The 2 Brahma Monarch God Emperors who were thought to be deceased, Kaianai Wugu and Kaianai Bingzhu, have re-emerged and sided with the devil race. We now have confirmation that the Brahma Monarch realm was hiding the primordial seal of life and death, and that they've found a way to use it. The Southern Sea realm was destroyed in a single day. The Southern Divine Region was so scared that Deep Sea, Xuanyuan and Purple Micro all surrendered to the devil race without resisting. Ash was killed. Big Brother was injured by the Devil Queen and is still recuperating. Your Highness, Crimson Destruction is too ashamed to see you. All the realms of the Western Divine Region are ready for combat. We only need your orders and your leadership now. Your Majesty." The 8 Dragon Gods' sound transmissions entered his ears in rapid succession. He could hear their excitement, joy, regret. The chaos was unprecedented. It was obvious how serious the situation had become. The Dragon Monarch didn't give them a reply. However, his expression and even his eyes didn't change in the slightest. He slowly and soundlessly walked toward a certain destination. He was the supreme ruler of the current world, and yet he tiptoed as if he was terrified of disturbing something or someone. A long time later, he came to a stop. An imposing draconic barrier that isolated everything, aura, light, sound, and more, stood in front of him. Any living being who came within 500 kilometers of the barrier would immediately be struck by a sense of terror. They wouldn't dare to take even a single step forward. It was because the barrier had been laid down by none other than himself. The draconic aura circulating the barrier was his own aura. Not only that, he had injected a small amount of his soul into the barrier. If someone tried to break through the barrier, he would be alerted immediately unless he was in the God realm of absolute beginning. He was certain that no one had so much as touched the barrier, however. There were a lot of dragon slayers in this world, but none were foolish enough to provoke the Dragon Monarch himself. As a result, no one knew what had transpired in the world inside the barrier. The Dragon Monarch raised his hand quietly, and a gap about 3.5 meters tall appeared in front of him. He exhaled once and stepped in. The gap vanished the second he stepped through, giving no one any chance to peek through it. The Dragon Monarch stood where he was and stared at the white light in front of him for a very, very long time. The light belonged to the barrier of the forbidden land of Samsara, a barrier that had existed for over 200,000 years. It was quiet, pure, flawless, and eternal. The power used to construct it was a class above all else, and yet it wasn't intimidating in the slightest. In fact, it cleansed the mind and soul like the purest water in the entire universe. But that was no longer the case. Only a couple of years had passed since that day, and yet it had become weak, fragile, and almost non-existent. The barrier was now so thin that it looked like a wisp that could disappear at any moment. An entire hour later, Long Bai finally stepped forward. The surroundings had changed completely as well. The elements were no longer gentle, the air no longer felt fresh, the wind no longer felt comfortable, and the soil no longer smelled intoxicating. The cloud that usually frolicked across the grass was completely gone. The chirping birds and dancing butterflies were nowhere to be seen, and even the spirit flowers and plants that covered the ground had wilted away. The forbidden land of Samsara was just a place where the well of Samsara was located. It wasn't a fairyland from the beginning. It was Xianxia's presence that had turned it into a fairyland. Now that she was gone, all that was left was a rapidly wilting garden and a well that had been dead for eternity. For the past 200,000 years or so, one look at Xianxia was all it took to fill him with infinite joy and satisfaction. Nothing seemed insurmountable to him as long as she was around. Now she wasn't. Not anymore, perhaps forever. Listen, Long Bai, if anything were to happen to Zir, I will give up the light, turn into a devil, and make you suffer through every torture that exists in the world. I will spill your blood and scatter your ashes to every corner of this god realm, so that you will be stepped on by every living creature in the world for all eternity. Long Bai raised his head with his eyes tightly shut. His facial muscles were clearly writhing in agony. Every day without fail, Xianxia's tearful, hate-filled curses would resound in his mind and soul 1,000,000 times. The way she had looked at him especially felt like the world's cruelest, most poisonous blade gouging his heart again, and again, and again, never-ending. Another unknown period of time later, he finally arrived at the center of the forbidden land of Samsara, former home of Xianxia. The bamboo house she once lived in had crumbled into a floor of dead bamboo. Suddenly, he picked up a few wisps of pure spirit energy. He glanced to the side and saw a clump of still living spirit plants swaying to the wind. These spirit flowers were the lowest existence in this tiny world, and yet they had captured his eyes like Xianxia herself. Heart suddenly beating a lot faster, he strode toward the bush until he suddenly lost strength in his legs and stumbled to the ground. The knees that had never bent to anyone crushed a couple of flowers and leaves and sank into the soft soil. One at the center of the bush of flowers was a pool of dry blood. A couple of years had passed since that day, and yet they were still giving off faint auras of light. For a moment, the aura that belonged to Xianxia and Xianxia alone filled up every corner of his soul. He unconsciously extended a hand toward the blood stains, fingers shaking and swaying uncontrollably. Right before he was about to make contact, though, he abruptly withdrew his hand and bent down like some sort of dying fish that was thrown into a dried pond. He was inhaling the scent like his very life depended on it. No one would ever believe that the dragon monarch, the unparalleled master of this word, would be capable of such an ugly and even disgusting act unless they saw it with their own eyes. A long time later, he suddenly stopped his mad breathing and dropped on one side of his body. He curled up like a prawn and lifted his shivering right hand into view. This was the arm that had hurt Xianxia that year. A relationship that lasted 300,000 years, and a dream that lasted over 200,000 years, gone in an instant. There was Xianxia, and then there was no more. Where are you, Dragon Queen, where are you? I know you're still alive, but why can't I find you? I'll promise you anything if you return. I will do anything to save your child. I will raise her like my own daughter. I will make her the future master of the dragon race if that is your wish. If you return. Ahem. His eyes were blank, and he wouldn't stop muttering to himself. Blood was trickling down his mouth, and yet he didn't notice it at all. This arm? He stared at his right arm with what could only be described as a shocking amount of loathing and hatred. I will cut it off for hurting you for now, though. I still need it for something. I need it to kill Yun-Chi. When the name tumbled out of his mouth, his eyes sharpened like needles, and his killing intent grew so much that it almost felt tangible. No one is worthy of my dragon queen, and that animal dared sully her. He must die, he must die. I will tear him to pieces, crush his body, grind him to dust, and scatter his ashes across the world. Crack, his bones broke audibly as he clenched his fists. The dragon monarch hated Yun-Chi as much as Yun-Chi hated him. Long Bai had been a variable Kai Waya wanted to avoid as much as possible when they launched their first assault on the eastern divine region. But Yun-Chi, the devil master, wished that Long Bai would show up so he could sacrifice his divine origins and tear him to pieces with god ash as soon as possible. The opposite was equally true. In fact, Long Bai's madness might even be greater than Yun-Chi's. There was a dark shadow residing inside his eyes, but it wasn't the northern region devil race, but Xianxia. A venomous flame burned within that shadow. He had been waiting for Xianxia to reappear all this time. He had known that the boy would return eventually. The comeback was far, far sooner than he predicted. However, in just 4 years, the boy had become as powerful as a god emperor and taken control over the entire northern divine region. Even he had to admit that his progress was terrifying, dark, and impressive. No matter how impressive he was, he would never, ever, ever be worthy of his dragon queen. He should never have sullied her. To slaughter Xianxia even a moment sooner. The supreme ruler of God realm burned with a kind of madness no ordinary person could possibly imagine. Back at the southern divine region, the 10 directions deep sea realm, Kai Wao abruptly rose to her feet and frowned deeply. "What's wrong?" Kai and Yinger asked immediately. Kai Wao slowly returned to her seat and said, "The dragon monarch has returned." "Oh," Kai and Yinger looked surprised. "Didn't you say that he should linger around the god realm of absolute beginning for at least another 2 months? It's only been half a month since your declaration." "That is why there is the saying, no plan survives first contact with the enemy," replied Kai Wao as she continued to frown. She thought to herself, was Long Bai's premature return the reason behind my worries? He is a threat. But that doesn't seem right. Her Nirvana Devil Emperor's soul was such a transcendent existence that it sometimes gave her supernatural danger senses. Her soul would warn her of danger even before the crisis had arrived. It was very different from Shui Meiyan's divine stainless soul. "HMPH, this is good news." "Right," Kai and Yinger replied. "Xianxia longs to slaughter Long Bai with his own hands. Strategically speaking, we have lost our best chance to destroy the dragon god realm while the dragon monarch was gone. However, Xianxia will only see this as a good thing. He's coming out in 4 days anyway. If anything, this timing is perfect." Kai Wao remained as silent as death. "You look worried?" Kai and Yinger eyed her. It is true that the dragon god realm's control over the western divine region would greatly increase with the dragon monarch's return. But if Xianxia kills him, then that control would vanish just as quickly, if not quicker. "We've considered all this already. So what are you worried about?" "That's a good question." Kai Wao narrowed her eyes into half-slits. "What am I worried about?" "Allow me to change my question a little. What kind of scenario will it take to catch us off guard?" muttered Kai Wao while tapping her lip with a finger. "HMPH. Kai and Yinger humphed disdainfully. "The only thing that could surprise us now is if Long Bai shows up with the full might of Dragon God realm right now." Kai and Yinger was obviously joking, but Kai Wao immediately paled like a ghost. Xianxia was currently inside the eternal Heaven-Defying realm, and it would be another 4 days before he returned to them. If the Dragon God realm truly were to descend upon them with the full might of the Western Divine region while he was gone, they would definitely be in grave danger. Spiritually speaking, Xianxia's absence during the invasion would drastically lower the devil people's morale. Physically speaking, their fighting strength would also fall off drastically without calamity and misfortune. Moreover, the Dragon God realm alone was almost unbeatable. The entire Western Divine region, it was simply impossible. Worse, Xianxia specifically instructed them not to disturb him until he exited the eternal Heaven-Defying realm. They couldn't even move the orb because there was a chance it might disrupt its stability. The eternal Heaven-Defying realm was a special realm with its own independent time and space laws. If it were to collapse, a time and space distortion could occur and wipe out Xianxia and Shui Meiyan from existence. In other words, not even hiding was an option. Kai Wao's reaction surprised Kai and Yinger. The latter narrowed her eyes slightly and said, "Do you actually believe that could happen?" "Ha, even if Long Bai were to issue the order to march to the southern divine region right now, and assuming no delays were to happen during this time, it'll take at least several days to mobilize the forces of the western divine region. By the time they finally reach us, 10 days would have passed by already." Kai Wao opened her eyes and said seriously, "The worst blow the world can throw at you usually comes from the unknown. The Dragon God realm doesn't know that we have the primordial profound arc equally." Her voice dropped lower. "There might be something that we don't know about the Dragon God realm. They are the Dragon God realm after all, the strongest, oldest and greatest realm in the entire history of God realm. Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter 1. Jia Yuan doesn't count 1. Jia Yuan doesn't count." Kai Wao's voice and expression were grave and somber, which immediately caused Kai and Yinger to arch those beautiful golden brows of hers. After getting to know Kai Wao over the years, She had vaguely realized that Kai Waiao's Nirvana Devil soul had the strange and unique ability of spiritual premonition. As a result, Kai and Yinger never took her unease lightly. After she gave the matter some thought, Kai and Yinger said, "If the worst-case scenario we hypothesized about truly comes to pass, the first condition that must be fulfilled is that the Dragon God realm needs to have a grand dimensional formation of the highest class, one that will allow you to cross into another divine region. However, I have never seen any such dimensional formation being recorded in the annals of any star realm. I have already assimilated most of the memories left to me by all the Brahma heaven god emperors, and there isn't any such thing recorded there either. On the contrary, a dimensional formation very similar to what I just described did appear in this generation. That is the grand dimensional formation that the entire universe knows about, the one that the eternal heaven god realm built together with the cooperation of countless star realms in order to deal with the crimson calamity. The dimensional formation that connected the eternal heaven god realm to the very borders of the primal chaos dimension. Moreover, the foundations of this grand dimensional formation still exist unharmed within the eternal heaven god realm, and it could be activated again as long as someone poured enough power into it. Even though the amount of resources you would need to consume for a single round trip was enough to send a king realm into convulsions. That was also why they had used the words, "stake it all on one throw," when the eternal heaven god realm had begun construction on this dimensional formation. Kai Waiao remained in quiet contemplation, but she was listening carefully to what Kai and Yinger said. Kai and Yinger continued, "In order to finish building that grand dimensional formation on time, the eternal heaven god realm laid the groundwork more than a decade in advance, and they still had to rely on the help of many king realms and upper star realms in the later stages of the project, just to get it over the finish line. Furthermore, they were only able to get it done within that time because the eternal heaven god realm possessed the strongest spatial profound artifact in the universe, the Great Void Cauldron. If it had been any other king realm undertaking the task, they might not have been able to finish that project even if they were given 100 years of time. As such, these words have proven that the hypothesized worst-case scenario can never come to pass." Kai and Yinger came to her conclusion. But what if such a grand dimensional formation already existed? Kai Waiao mused to herself in a soft voice. A dimensional formation that would allow someone to cross from the dragon god realm to the southern divine region would not only be gigantic, but the time taken to construct it would also be extremely long. As such, the vibrations of energy that emanated from it during construction would surely stretch out across vast distances of space. And there is no way that this event wouldn't have been recorded in any annals or historical records whatsoever. Kai Waiao fell into another long silence before she finally gave a faint nod of her head and said, "Your reasoning is faultless." Still, the unease in her heart hadn't died down one iota. However, this matter is far too grave to ignore, and we need to proceed with the greatest caution and prudence. After all, Xianxia is gone for the next few days, and we have to guard against even the wildest possibilities. Kai Waiao's eyes grew cold as she barked out an order. "Hua Jin, summon Kang Shishin." Before too long, the figure of Kang Shishin could be seen rushing towards them. "Shishin greets the Devil Queen. Does the Devil Queen have any instructions for me?" Kang Shishin showed Kai Waiao the same amount of reverence he normally showed to Xianxia. "God Emperor Shishin, where are the 10-direction deep sea realm's strongest barriers and defensive profound formations located?" Kai Waiao asked directly. Any proper star realm would have its own grand defensive barrier. The strongest of them all, the king realms, did not disregard the importance of this barrier in the slightest. Rather, they regarded this matter with extreme importance, and every generation would try to strengthen the barrier by at least a little bit. Because they, who were used to proudly looking down on the rest of the universe, were also most afraid of the idea of being destroyed. The most important reason for the eternal heaven god realm and southern sea god realm's swift destruction had been the fact that the enemy had already infiltrated them. So even activating their barrier accomplished nothing. Kang Shishin understood the implicit meaning in her words and replied, "The ultimate barrier of my 10 directions deep sea realm doesn't cover the entire realm. Instead, it focuses on protecting the deep sea divine region. The moment it's activated, only those who possess the deep sea divine blood can enter and exit the barrier freely. Those who do not can exit the barrier, but they won't be able to enter it again." "How long will it take you to get it ready for activation?" Kai Waiao asked. Kang Shishin didn't waste any time asking pointless questions. Instead, he immediately replied, "We replenish the power supply of our barriers once every 3 years, and we always maintain a supply of at least 70%. Even if we are confronted with a grave threat, the fastest we can activate that ultimate barrier is 30 breaths of time." "Very good," Kai Weil replied. "Then I want you to immediately charge this barrier of yours to its maximum capacity and keep it in a state where it can be activated at any given time. I need you to accomplish this as quickly as possible, so do not stint on the resources that need to be used." Kang Shishin's brow sank a smidgen, but he immediately cupped his hands and replied, "Yes, the Devil Queen can come over and inspect the barrier herself once 12 hours have passed. You may leave." Kang Shishin made a short bow and immediately left to see to his task. HMPH, he didn't say one unnecessary thing, nor did he ask any unnecessary questions. What a trustworthy lackey! Kai and Yinger, who had been coldly glaring at Kang Shishin all this while, scoffed in contempt. Kai Weil closed her eyes and used her fingers to pinch the space in between her eyes. Threads of black light flowed along her long black hair as she said in a somber voice, "During this period of time, I need to focus all of my attention on the movements of the Dragon God realm, so I'll leave the running of this place to you. I've already sent a sound transmission to my children, so they will obey your commands in the meantime." "Oh, really?" Kai and Yinger's golden eyes narrowed as a strange light glinted within them. "Aren't you afraid that I'll take this opportunity to order those witches to become the Devil Master's new playthings in bed?" "Sigh." Kai Weil gave a long and exhausted sigh. "Being able to train you into such a character is also a talent of his, I suppose." "Him?" Kai and Yinger gave a soft snort. "He's just a beast, one that only knows how to rut violently at that. The only person who has ever been in charge of me is me. No one else can choose what I become." After she finished speaking, Kai and Yinger turned around and walked away. As she exited the hall, Kai and Yinger looked to the sky. It had once been as blue as the clear waters of the ocean, but now it was covered with a dull layer of dreary-looking clouds. The skies had already turned dark in the distant west. Dark clouds roiled in the air, and it seemed as if a great storm was about to fall over the land. Kai and Yinger's brow sank as she suddenly turned around and flew towards the deep-sea royal hall. As she passed through the barriers and arrived in the heart of the hall, she saw the eternal heaven pearl quietly glowing with a dense white light. The 3 Yama ancestors were sitting around it in a triangle formation, and each of them were situated about 3 meters away from the pearl as they guarded it. They hadn't moved a single inch since they had begun their duty. "Listen up," Kai and Yinger said to the 3 Yama ancestors. "Your master will leave the eternal heaven pearl in about 4 days. Before that comes to pass, you must not allow yourselves to be distracted, no matter what happens. Your job is to protect the eternal heaven pearl and that alone. Don't get involved in any other disturbances that you may sense. This is your only and most important mission, do you understand?" "Yes, yes. Please do not worry, Lady Kainying," the 3 Yama ancestors said in unison as their heads dutifully bobbed up and down. A pair of golden eyes lingered on the eternal heaven pearl for a good long while before Kai and Yinger finally left. The 3 Yama ancestors exchanged looks with each other after that. The same thought filled their heads at the same time. That was extremely strange. She deliberately made a trip here to repeat an order that had already been given to us before. Does she think that we 3 old monsters are getting forgetful with age? Within the eternal Heaven-Defying realm, inside of the Sky Poison Pearl's world. "Yeah." Hunger yawned loudly as she lazily stretched. After that, she started complaining in a whiny voice. "I'm so bored. Master is doing that weird thing again, and Big Sis He Ling is simply standing there and not moving. They haven't played with us for the longest time already." Ewer nodded her head stoically in agreement. "Oh, that's right. Let's take this chance to try that out again while Master is doing that weird thing together with that big sister." When Hunger broached this subject, her eyes immediately started glinting with a bright red light, and her excitement was plain on her face. Ewer opened and closed her mouth a few times before she finally managed to reply in a voice as weak as an infant's. "Okay." Hunger skipped forward happily before stopping in front of Ewer. After that, she extended both hands towards her. 2 pairs of delicate, snow-white hands which only differed by the light radiating from their skin gently grasped each other. "Close your eyes," Hunger said as she shut her ruby eyes. After that, a delighted red blush spread across her face as she crowed. "Let's begin." Both girls slowly leaned towards each other as their vermilion and silver locks started to silently tangle themselves together, and they only stopped when their forehead finally touched. Red light immediately pulsed out of Honger's body as Yuer's gray light started to flow all over her body. The two wondrous contrasting colors actually started to mingle together, and the bodies of the two girls also began to grow diaphanous as they started to merge together in a bizarre manner. After that, they actually merged to form the body of a slender and beautiful girl who looked a fair bit older than either of the girls. Long quicksilver hair and ruby red eyes. Her shoulders trembled gently as her eyes slowly glanced around. That brief moment of grace and beauty was enough to instantly dim the emerald light that glowed eternally in the sky-poisoned pearl. However, the girl's body instantly grew hazy and diaphanous as well, and both Honger and Yuer's bodies instantly coalesced from within her. After that, the girl's figure vanished as if it had never been there in the first place as both Honger and Yuer fell to the ground with yelps of pain. Wah! Honger sat up straight as she chortled excitedly. This is so fun, and we managed to make it last a really long time this time. Even though this transformation had only lasted 2 breaths, it had lasted far longer than any of their previous attempts, so it really was a really long time. Furthermore, I could see even more of Yuer's thoughts this time. Just like I thought Yuer is the same as me, we both sorely miss big sister He Ling. HMPH, this is all Master's fault. Yuer opened her mouth and 2 faint and indistinct words emerged from those tender lips. Nai, Jai. Her eyes were filled with dazed confusion. She had no idea why those 2 words had suddenly surfaced from within her soul. Honger tilted her head sideways when she heard those words before she replied. Just like I thought Yuer is the same as me. That name suddenly popped into your head as well. Why did I know that this is a name? That's so strange. Who cares? Honger had never let a matter frustrate her for too long. She waved a tiny hand, and a long sword emanating a brilliant purple light appeared in it out of nowhere. After that, she eagerly bit down on the body of the sword, breaking it in 2. Both her hands held half of the sword as she chomped down on her meal happily. Before he entered the eternal Heaven-Defying realm, Xianxia got Xianxia to rustle up a pile of divine swords. These swords would serve as Honger's snacks, so she wouldn't get up to any funny business while he was cultivating. You must remember that this is our little secret. Let's not tell Master about it yet, Honger said seriously. The sight of her trying to speak seriously while her cheeks bulged with food was hilariously adorable. Okay, Yuer said as she obediently nodded her head. Her eyebrows wiggled adorably as a smile that was too pure and cute for this world appeared on her doll-like face. The arrival of the Dragon Monarch had sent the entire Western Divine region into a tizzy. The Dragon God realm, which had been gritting their teeth in silence all this while, could finally move without any constraints. We greet the Dragon Monarch! We greet the Dragon Monarch! As Long Bai walked forward, all the dragons around him bent their heads and knelt in obeisance. The Master Dragons, Dragon Sovereigns, and the 8 Dragon Gods had gathered at the Dragon God domain long ago. As he stepped into the Imperial Dragon Hall, the first person Long Bai directed his gaze to was a special guest of the Dragon God realm. Brother Eternal Heaven, you've truly suffered. Long Bai spoke first, his voice tinged with a deep sorrow. Zhou Ziuzi barked out a dry and sorrowful chuckle before he cupped his hands and said, The Eternal Heaven God realm was destroyed because of this old man, so I no longer deserve to be addressed with the title of Eternal Heaven. Now I only hope that I can be an old sword strapped to the Dragon Monarch's belt as I accompany you in driving out the devils and killing Xianxia. Long Bai replied, There's no need for Brother Eternal Heaven to be so gloomy. You are still alive, so the day that the devil race is extinguished will be the day that the light of the Eternal Heaven shines again. This old man thanks the Dragon Monarch for his kind words. It has put my heart at ease. He smiled at the Dragon Monarch gratefully as he pulled the young man standing beside him forward. This is my unworthy son, King Feng. The future of the new, nascent Eternal Heaven realm will rest on the shoulders of him and his generation. However, even if they did end up destroying the devil race, would an Eternal Heaven God realm without the Eternal Heaven Pearl truly be able to reach its former heights again? Zhou Qingfeng immediately fell to his knees and kowtowed towards the Dragon Monarch. This junior Zhou Qingfeng greets the Dragon Monarch. Long Bai glanced at him and said, Since you are the successor that Brother Eternal Heaven picked personally, you will definitely go on to do great things in the future. There's no need for such formalities, please rise. The 8 dragon gods had lined up in 2 rows to greet the dragon monarch. The Crimson Destruction dragon god was the first one to stand up and move to speak to the dragon monarch. He suppressed the excitement and wildly raging emotions in his heart before he said in a solemn voice, "My lord dragon monarch, there's no need to say anything." Longbai raised a hand to cut off the Crimson Destruction dragon god before he could even begin. He looked out into the distance as a soul-shaking divine light erupted from his eyes. "You are to immediately send this order to the Qilin realm, the Emperor Kai realm, the Blue Dragon realm, the Hui Dragon realm, and the Myriad Manifestation realm. Tell their emperors that they are to personally lead all of their divine masters to the Dragon God realm within the next 48 hours. I expect all of them to be present in the Dragon God domain by then. If anyone dares to even hold anything back, then they can't blame this dragon for being ruthless." All 8 dragon gods nodded their heads as their hearts wildly shuddered. As the dragon gods, the beings closest to Longbai, this was the most tyrannical and shocking order they had ever heard the dragon monarch give. It was so astonishingly overbearing that they could scarcely believe that it had come out of the dragon monarch's mouth. God Realm was the supreme ruler of the God Realm and the direct ruler of the Western Divine region. The generations of dragon monarchs had very rarely given any orders to the Western Divine region or the other king realms. They had also very rarely forced someone into compliance. This was because the dragon god race's pride and strength caused them to look down on such methods. To them, such things were unnecessary. However, the command that Longbai had just given was extremely tyrannical and unyielding. He had even said the words, "They can't blame me for being ruthless." The 8 dragon gods themselves were completely and utterly shocked by those words, so they could well imagine what sort of waves it would cause when it reached the ears of the 5 king realms of the Western Divine region. However, once they recovered from their shock, the 8 dragon gods felt blood rushing through their bodies. The Ash dragon god had died a miserable death, and the Crimson Destruction dragon god had been utterly shamed and humiliated. So the proud dragon blood that had lain dormant in the 8 dragon gods for countless years had been brought to a boil due to their shared wrath and indignation. As a result, Longbai's sudden heavy-handedness and ruthless decisiveness stirred them up much more than it had shocked them. Longbai only wanted the divine masters of the 5 king realms. This battle was going to be the grandest battle in the history of the God realm, so he really only did need the divine masters. Anybody who was weaker than a divine master would be no more than an ant in the upcoming battle. "Yes," the Azure Dragon god shouted, but he immediately continued after that. "All of the upper star realms have also prepared for battle, do we?" "There's no need," Longbai replied in a grave voice. "These upper star realms only have 1 or 2 divine masters apiece, and all of them have their own grievances and petty squabbles, their own habits and idiosyncrasies. They are nothing more than a tray of loose sand. Furthermore, most of them won't be able to get here within 48 hours, so it's pointless to mobilize them. Also," Longbai turned around, the touch of his dark and somber gaze making everyone feel as if a mountain had landed on their shoulders. "Summon back any and all of the dragon sovereigns and master dragons who are still abroad. This is a matter of extreme importance, so all of them need to rush back within the next 48 hours. Longbai's voice was calm and serious, but it was enough to shake the entire dragon god domain, as the hearts and souls of all those who were present trembled. They also noticed that Longbai's determination to wipe out the northern divine region far exceeded even their wildest imaginations. Zhou Ziuzi found it hard to contain the excitement that was blooming on his wizened face. Before this moment, he had feared that the dragon monarch would do one of 2 things. The first was that the dragon monarch would completely underestimate the northern divine region, and the second was that he would be arrogant enough to disdain making any big moves, instead choosing to wait for Yun Qi to come to him. However, all those worries were for naught. The dragon monarch had returned, and he had summoned all of the dragon gods, dragon sovereigns, and master dragons back to the dragon god realm. He had even forcibly conscripted all of the divine masters in the western region's 5 king realms. The grand scale of this mobilization, and the ruthless decisiveness that drove it, convinced everyone present that the doom of the devil race was nigh. If the dragon monarch is going to be this vigilant, the northern divine region is sure to die, Zhou Ziuzi mumbled to himself as he closed his eyes. Azure, jade, pure white rainbow, cyan abyss, purple river, sky. Longbai read out the titles of the dragon gods one by one. All of you are to personally see to the order that I just gave. There must be no mistakes. Crimson Destruction, you are to follow me. Southern Divine Region, 10 Directions Deep Sea Realm. The jade finger that Kai Wyo had pressed in the space in between her eyes unconsciously twitched, as the black light in her eyes slowly transformed into a boundlessly deep vortex of darkness. A look of unprecedented solemnness had also appeared on her face. What sort of situation would cause a huge power to choose to cut off all methods of retreat and leave no room for error? She had thought only the devil of the Northern Divine Region had the resolve to throw their lives away like this, and this had been due to their million years of hatred and resentment. However, Long Bai, who stood above the entire universe and controlled the exalted dragon god realm in the palm of his hands, had used his authority as the dragon monarch to give a similar order. This definitely wasn't due to the fact that he suddenly viewed the Northern Divine Region as a proper threat. It was clear that there was a dreadfully twisted reason for his actions. A warped distortion in his heart, induced by extreme hate. Kai Wyo felt a headache gathering at her temples. The dragon monarch loved the dragon queen and viewed her as a treasure. This was something the entire god realm knew about. However, Kai Wyo knew a very long time ago that the dragon monarch's infatuation with Xianxia had far exceeded what any normal person could ever imagine. It was at this moment that Kai Wyo realized that she had been mistaken. The dragon monarch's feelings toward Xianxia could no longer be called simple infatuation. They had evolved into a crazed obsession. He practically valued her more than the entire dragon god realm. The Northern Divine Region had had a huge advantage against the other 3 divine regions in their previous fights, and that was their resolve to fight to the death. On the other hand, the major powers of the other 3 divine regions had put their survival first and foremost, and none of them were willing to gamble their tens of thousands of years of power in a desperate life-or-death struggle against the devils of the north. This huge advantage had just vanished into the ether now that they were facing the strongest dragon god realm. The dragon monarch, who should have been the most steady and calculative person in the universe, had actually chosen a method that even a common realm king would consider extreme. He had not only chosen to mobilize the entire core of the dragon god realm's power, but he was even forcefully conscripting the core forces of the other 5 king realms of the Western Divine Region. The price Kai Wyo had paid to defeat the Crimson Destruction dragon god had not been small, but she had made that sacrifice in order to scare the 5 king realms of the Western Divine Region into thinking about self-preservation instead. Now, that effort had practically been nullified by the dragon monarch's actions. To think that the supreme ruler of the god realm, Long Bai, would turn out to be its biggest lunatic, Kai Wyo muttered to herself. Xianxia, just what sort of person is she that she could make the ruler of the universe go mad for her? In the end, this is really something that Yun Qi brought on himself. Kai Wyo gave a short sigh of lament as this unresolvable worry continued to gnaw at her mind. He also kept repeating and emphasizing 48 hours. Long Bai took the lead and Long Fei followed behind him as they traversed the length of the dragon god domain. They reached a very special barrier and opened it, stepping into an underground palace that had not been disturbed for many years. The Crimson Destruction dragon god suddenly halted, his draconic eyes shaking in their sockets. Dragon Monarch, are we actually going to? Long Bai simply ignored his words and continued walking forward. The Crimson Destruction dragon god did not speak again. He gave a silent sigh as his face swiftly grew composed and solemn again. This underground building that had not seen the light of day for countless years was both huge and desolate. A dim light that was radiating from some unknown place layered the entire space with gray. However, this desolate emptiness also contained an incredibly dreadful oppressiveness that was so heavy that it could even suffocate a divine master. The pace of both dragons unconsciously started to slow. This empty and gray space was exceptionally long, and there were no more barriers to obstruct them. However, that dreadful and heavy oppressiveness made every step forward incredibly difficult. Their slow and measured footsteps continued for a long time before they finally reached their destination. The gray light in front of them revealed 5 figures that were sitting side by side. No aura radiated from their bodies, and they seemed to be the desiccated corpses of people who had died many years ago. In this dreadful and solemn silence, Long Bai slowly raised a hand. "Please wait a moment." The Crimson Destruction dragon god anxiously stepped forward and forcefully grabbed Long Bai's rising arm with his right hand. He said, "My Lord Dragon Monarch, even though the northern region is strong, doing this is too much." Long Bai did not speak. He merely looked at him with calm and steady eyes. The Crimson Destruction Dragon God quietly clenched his teeth. He quickly regained his composure and slowly released his grip on the Dragon Monarch's arm. He retreated a step and bowed his head in shame as he said, "I have overstepped my bounds. I beg the Dragon Monarch for forgiveness." Long Bai still didn't reply. Instead, the draconic energy in his hand started to shake as his eyes flashed. He unleashed his draconic energy and his dragon soul at the same time, and a solid-looking wave of white light engulfed the 5 gray and withered figures. Roar? Even though this dragon roar was rather soft and muffled, it reverberated violently in this dim space. As the dragon roar resounded in this empty space, the 5 mummified corpses slowly opened eyes that had been closed for countless years as they started to straighten their backs. 5 pairs of turbid ancient eyes opened fully, and the entire space became incredibly quiet. It seemed as if even the smallest mote of dust had become frozen in place. "Who has awakened us?" A voice as vast as the sky itself resounded in this sealed space. It had clearly come from the hunched figure in the middle, but it also seemed to have come from a vast and distant sky. Thud. The Crimson Destruction Dragon God fell to his knees heavily, as the head of the strongest dragon god deeply bowed towards the withered figure that sat on the extreme right. "Your unfilial son Long Fei greets royal father." The hunched figure replied in a deep voice, "My name is Long Wu. I am not your deceased royal father. There is no need for the Crimson Destruction Dragon God to stand on ceremony." The forehead of the Crimson Destruction Dragon God remained pressed to the ground for a very long time before he finally got to his feet. However, unshed tears could be seen glimmering in his eyes for the briefest of moments before they disappeared. Long Bai stepped forward and announced in a calm voice, "I am the 7th Realm King of the Dragon God Realm, Long Bai, and I was the one who awakened the 5 venerable withered dragons from their slumber." "What calamity has befallen us?" the venerable withered dragon in the middle asked. 5 pairs of eyes focused on Long Bai. The Venerable Withered Dragons was a title that was not recorded in any annals or records, something that did not even exist in the memories of any king realms. They had never once shown themselves to the world. The lifespan of a dragon far exceeded that of the other races, and the dragon god race possessed the longest lifespan amongst the dragon races. The emperor of the dragon gods, Long Bai, could live up to 500,000 years, a number which was 10 times the limit of the human races. Furthermore, a dragon god who had reached the peak of the divine master realm had reached the limits of their dragon god divine power, and had full mastery over every strand of power in their body and soul, could cultivate an extremely mysterious forbidden art. The withered dragon divine hibernation. It was something that a dragon god that had reached the peak of power could only use once in their lives. Any dragon god who cultivated the withered dragon divine hibernation could enter a unique state of divine hibernation when their life was about to reach its natural end. Once they entered the state of divine hibernation, their body, power, and soul would fall into a deep sleep. This deep sleep would also cause their bodies to age extremely slowly, to the point where a dragon god's final lifespan could be stretched by another 200,000 years. The most absurd thing about the withered dragon divine hibernation was that it completely preserved the peak power and soul that the dragon god possessed in life, and they only had to be awakened once more to unleash their awe-inspiring might upon the world. The caveat was that these sleeping dragon gods could only be awakened once. Any dragon god who was roused from the withered dragon divine hibernation would inevitably pass on after 7 days, no matter what their age or condition before they entered into divine hibernation. Even a dragon god who had entered into this state during his peak years would still pass after 7 days. As such, the most powerful dragon gods who were about to die a natural death chose to use this method instead. To the rest of the world, they had already become dust hundreds of thousands of years ago, merely words on the pages of history. However, unbeknownst to everyone else, they had instead become the slumbering, venerable withered dragons, who had devoted the very last embers of their lives and will to become the hidden guardians of the dragon god realm, the most powerful guardians of the dragon god realm. If a calamity struck, they would be awakened from their sleep. If the eras were peaceful, they would naturally return to the dust after another 200,000 years, and a new venerable withered dragon would immediately take the place of the one who had passed on. In Long Bai's generation, there were 5 venerable withered dragons who were currently in hibernation. Furthermore, the person who was the latest to wear the title of Long Wu was the Crimson Destruction Dragon God's own father, the previous dragon monarch. Long Yi, Long Long San, Long Si, Long Wu. These were 5 names that could not be any more ordinary, but they belonged to the 5 strongest guardian dragon gods of the dragon god realm, who had willingly consigned themselves to slumber in this lightless and desolate place. And today, they were all woken up by Long Bai. This was also the very first time that any venerable withered dragon had ever been roused in the history of the dragon god realm. As he calmly met the gazes of the 5 great venerable withered dragons, Long Bai calmly replied, "The devils of the northern region have exploded out of their hive of darkness. Both the eastern divine region and southern divine region have fallen, and the entire universe is in peril. In fact, our race lost one of our 9 dragon gods, to the shock and dismay of the other realms. Even though the darkness has not yet encroached upon our borders, this dark calamity is entirely unprecedented in scale and impact. As such, I have come to awaken you 5 venerable ones." Long Bai's words stirred up the hearts of all 5 venerable withered dragons. "How did the insignificant northern region become such a plague upon our lands?" Long Yi asked in a sonorous voice. Long Bai replied, "Their leader is someone who inherited the powers of the heretic god, and he has also very likely inherited the legacy of the heaven-smiting devil emperor. As such, the originally harmless devils of the northern region have undergone a complete transformation in just a few short years thanks to him. The powers of the heretic god, the legacy of a devil emperor. Those words caused the hearts of these 5 venerable ones, hearts which were as dry as petrified wood, to shudder in a violent and uncontrollable manner. The good thing is that Xianxia is young and reckless, wild and arrogant. Hence, he only dwelled in the northern divine region for 4 years before leading that swarm of devils out of it. This has given us the best opportunity. If we cannot completely and utterly destroy him and his forces right now, he can simply flee back to the northern region and hole up in the darkness again. If that happens, the threat that awaits us in the future will be boundless. 4 short years, complete transformation of the northern region, the consecutive defeats of the eastern divine region and southern divine region. If we don't kill him now, the threat that awaits us will be boundless." These few words had become more than sufficient reason for the venerable withered dragons to rouse themselves from their slumber. Withered dragons slowly got to their feet. The dim underground space shook gently for an instant, and it still seemed to be trembling even after the shaking had subsided. "We only have 7 days, Long Yi said. Long Bai raised his hands and performed a simple gesture of respect as the dragon monarch. "After these 7 days have passed, the glorious feat of you 5 venerable ones destroying the devils will be carved into the annals of history. Once you become a withered dragon, you no longer care for such transient things as fame," Long rumbled. "The dragon gods who preserved the last of their life and strength to transform into the slumbering guardians of the dragon god realm had naturally abandoned all of their worldly desires a very long time ago. They had all once been figures which had reigned over the universe, but they were also people that the world thought had been consigned to the pages of history. Where are the creatures of darkness right now?" Long San asked, his imperial majesty shaking the air. Amongst the 5 great venerable withered dragons, 2 of them were dragon monarchs of old. One was Long Wu, and the other was Long San. Long Yi, Long and Long Si were all previous dragon gods. However, anyone who had the privilege to cultivate the withered dragon divine hibernation and become one of the sleeping guardians of the dragon god realm had reached the very limits of cultivation in the current era. This was especially true for Long He had been one of Long San's dragon gods in life, but when he entered divine hibernation, his power had exceeded Long San. The appearance of these 5 great venerable withered dragons would undoubtedly shake the world. "The southern divine region in the 10 directions deep sea realm," Long Bai replied. "I have already given the order to mobilize our entire race, and I have also gathered the strength of the Qilin realm, the Emperor Kai realm, the Blue Dragon realm, the Hui Dragon realm, and the Myriad Manifestations realm. 2 days from now, we will descend upon the devil race." 2 days from now? Long Wu raised his head to look at Long Bai, the cold might in his voice evident. "Why did you awaken us now then?" As someone who had received Xianxia's blessing for his entire life, Long Bai was undoubtedly the strongest dragon monarch in the history of the dragon god realm, whether it came to his dragon body or his dragon soul. As a result, he would not shrink even when faced with the might of his predecessors. He calmly replied, "I understand that all of you are only left with a short 7 days after you awaken. So I suggest that the 5 venerable ones take a look at the new world around them while completely awakening the power slumbering within your bodies. Once these 2 days have passed, it will only take us 2 hours to reach the southern region's 10 directions deep sea realm. To travel from the western region's dragon god realm to the southern region's 10 directions deep sea realm in 2 hours. Anyone who heard those words would instantly dismiss them as complete hogwash. However, these words had come from the dragon monarch's own mouth. Long Fei had already suspected something along those lines, so he didn't look too shocked. However, all of his mental preparation still couldn't stop his heart from shuddering violently at those words. All of the venerable withered dragons turned to look at Long Bai at the same time once they heard those words. "The World Dragon City?" Long Si asked. Long Bai replied, "That's right." The 5 venerable withered dragons fell silent at the same time. After a second had passed, Long Yi said, "Since we are now withered dragons, we are beholden to the current dragon monarch's commands, but using the World Dragon City is highly unorthodox. Please reconsider, dragon monarch." Long said, "Back in the ancient era of the gods, the heretic god built 2 profound ships and imbued them with the divine power of the world piercer. The first was called the spirit world of heaven and earth, and the second was called the World Dragon City. It is rumored that the spirit world of heaven and earth contains a gigantic world within it. As long as it has enough resources, it can jump through space at will. It is recorded that the heretic god gifted it to the Sword Spirit God clan. Unfortunately, it has long since vanished into history. The World Dragon City is the ship that the heretic god gifted to the dragon god race. It can compress space and shrink the distance between 2 points. It doesn't jump through space, but it still transcends the concept of speed. So even if we are traveling from the western region to the southern region, it will only take 2 hours. However, the energy source of the World Dragon City is extraordinary as well. The moment we use it, it might very well wither away forever. It is our dragon god race's last trump card and method of escape. Our founding ancestor said that we are not to use it unless our race is in danger. Long San said, "The dragon monarch's ardent desire to exterminate the devils is commendable, but you must reconsider this course of action." "I have already made up my mind." Long Bai didn't waver one bit despite the venerable withered dragon's advice. "Our dragon god race reigns above all creation. We are destined to be the rulers of the universe. From the inception of the god realm up to now, there has never been a race able to contend with us. However, Yun Qi, who has inherited the legacies of both the heretic god and a devil emperor, has perfectly seized upon the hatred festering in the northern divine region to become our sole threat, the sole wild card in this universe. He will also be the last threat and wild card to exist in this universe." Long Bai's eyes narrowed slightly as a shocking, majestic light shone from his eyes. "Once we eradicate this threat, there is nothing that will ever be able to threaten our race again. However, if we allow the devils to flee back to the northern region, the 3 divine regions will be powerless to deal with them. If we want to pull this threat up by the roots, we need to catch them by surprise and make sure that they have no way of avoiding or escaping us. Once we cut off their escape routes, we will end this plague forever. Hence, this is actually the most suitable time to use the World Dragon City. Rather than letting it slumber for all eternity, isn't it better to use it during this most opportune time? Let us show the world a unique miracle that comes from ancient times." 5 great venerable withered dragons did not attempt to persuade him again. Long Yi said, "Since the dragon monarch is so determined, then we will simply obey. We will simply be fulfilling the duty we have long waited for. We care not whether your actions are misguided or not. However, we still hope that the dragon monarch will seriously consider this matter over the next couple of days." The dragon monarch gave a slight nod of his head, but it was clear that he wasn't moved in the slightest by their words. After they walked out of the place where the venerable withered dragons had been hibernating, the Crimson Destruction Dragon God finally said, "My Lord Dragon Monarch, before you returned, I had been deathly worried that you would underestimate the devils of the north, but I never imagined that you would place such importance on them." Long Bai did not reply. The Crimson Destruction Dragon God asked another question. "My lord, there is something that I still do not understand. When I found you in the god realm of absolute beginning, You sent me a sound transmission telling me that you still needed to stay in the God realm of absolute beginning for another 2 months. Why did you? Do not ask any unnecessary questions. Yes. The Crimson Destruction Dragon God looked away from the Dragon Monarch and did not pursue the matter any further. He still did not know why the Dragon Monarch had gone to the God realm of absolute beginning. Why did you go there? That was the question that the Dragon Monarch would never be able to answer. 5 years ago, he had personally set up an isolating barrier around the forbidden land of Samsara, while he frantically searched for any traces of Xianxia in secret. He was sure that Xianxia wasn't dead, and he was definitely not able to accept her death either way. 5 fruitless years had gone by, but nothing had been accomplished. It was as if she had completely vanished from the world. There were no traces of her moving around in the universe, nor were there any reports of her corpse being discovered. There wasn't even a single trace of her to be found. A few months ago, the Azure Dragon God told him that he had discovered the aura of the Dragon Queen in the God realm of absolute beginning, and he hadn't waited a single second before making his decision. He merely left the Azure Dragon God with a few stern commands before he rushed off to the God realm of absolute beginning. In the end, he had indeed sensed Xianxia's aura in the area that the Azure Dragon God had reported. Even though it was extremely weak, it had indeed contained her divine aura of light, which no one in this universe could replicate. He slowly followed this extremely faint aura deeper and deeper into the God realm of the absolute beginning. Every time he was about to give up, another thread of her aura would arrive at the most convenient time and renew his determination to continue searching for her. By the time the 7th day had passed, he had already realized that it might have been a ruse to lure him away. However, he still chose to stay and continue searching for her even in spite of that. Later, the Crimson Destruction Dragon God sought out his aura and sent him a sound transmission to inform him of the North's invasion and the drastic changes to the Eastern Divine region. However, he had detected an exceptionally dense aura of light at that time, and he had also found a fragment of white cloth. One he could tell with a single glance that it was a fragment of Xianxia's outer garments. There were a bunch of faint red words radiating a slight aura of light written on that fragment of cloth. The words told him that she would return to this place sometime within the next 2 months. When he received the Crimson Destruction Dragon God's sound transmission, he became convinced that this had simply been a ruse to lure him away, a trap that couldn't have been any more simple. However, he still didn't leave. He even told the Crimson Destruction Dragon God that he would stay in the God realm of absolute beginning for another 2 months. Even if it was almost certain to be a ruse, he would still hold on to the smallest fragment of hope. Finally, half a month later, the last traces of her aura had disappeared from that piece of cloth, and he closed his eyes and gave a long sigh. He knew that it was time for him to wake up from this fruitless and crazy dream. At this time, countless strong auras started to approach the Dragon God realm. It seemed as if all the power in the Western Divine region was streaming toward it. However, this huge movement of forces was not something that could be concealed. Very soon, everyone in the universe knew that the Dragon God realm was about to make a move, and it was going to be a grand move. What was about to unfold was perhaps the largest and grandest battle the God realm had ever seen. It was also undoubtedly going to be the most terrible battle that the God realm had ever seen. A battle that would be so dreadful that even divine sovereigns had no place in it. The news swiftly spread through the entire Western Divine region before it started spreading through the other regions. Both the Eastern Divine region and the Southern Divine region grew quiet after they received the news. It was as if all the profound practitioners across the God realm were collectively holding their breath as they waited for the battle to decide the fate of the God realm. The Xuanyuan realm and Purple Micro realm also became exceedingly obedient at that time. The 2 great god emperors turtled in their homes and refused to come out. They definitely would not dare to step foot in the 10 directions deep sea realm. These 48 hours passed by in a flash. The Dragon Monarch's strongly worded command had forced the 5 god emperors of the Western Divine region, who had all made their own little plans and contingencies at first, to rush over to the Dragon God realm within those 48 hours. They had also obediently brought all of their best troops with them as they gathered in the Dragon God domain. At the very least, they did not dare reserve any part of their forces that were known to the world. Within the 10-direction deep sea realm, Kang Shishan was currently delivering a report regarding the massive movements in the Western Divine region to the Devil Queen. In the last 4 hours, the profound warships from the Killin realm, the Emperor Kai realm, the Blue Dragon realm, the Hui Dragon realm, and the Myriad Manifestations realm have arrived in the Dragon God realm. All of them are their core profound warships, and the entire assemblage of these forces is astounding. Many of the dragon sovereigns and master dragons who are outside the Dragon God realm are also rushing back at full speed, and it is very possible that all of them have been recalled. However, the Dragon Monarch does not seem to have shown his face during the last 2 days. Kang Shishin looked up to observe Kai Wao's reaction before he continued. The Devil Master originally planned to launch a surprise assault on the Dragon God realm so that he could catch them before the Dragon Monarch's return. But the Dragon Monarch's sudden return has spoiled that. Furthermore, it seems as if he is preparing for his own decisive move as well. As such, there is no way for us to launch a surprise attack anymore, and we might want to consider whether we even want to launch the assault at all. Now that the entire Western Divine region seems to have mobilized, I'm afraid that they will probably come knocking on our door before we even have a chance to attack. Kang Shishin did not pass up an opportunity to flatter Kai Wao as he said. However, the Devil Queen's excellent foresight led to Shishin preparing the deep sea barrier. It seems as if the Devil Queen had already suspected that such a scenario might occur. I understand. You may leave, Kai Wao simply replied. She actually didn't need Kang Shishin to report to her at all. All of her attention had been focused on the Dragon God realm over the last few days, as she had used Zhou Zuzi's eyes to spy on all the changes happening in the Dragon God realm. As such, she was far more clear on the situation than even Kang Shishin. Kang Shishin did not immediately leave. Instead, he asked, Devil Queen, this Shishin has a question. How much longer will the Lord Devil Master be in seclusion? The Dragon God realm might launch their attack at any moment, and we will need the Devil Master to decide whether we should fight or flee. There is no need for you to waste any energy on this matter. The Devil Master will naturally appear when it is time, Kai Wao replied in a calm voice. She naturally couldn't let it be known that Yun Qi had entered the Eternal Heaven Pearl, so the news that was released publicly had stated that Yun Qi had suddenly found an opportunity to achieve a breakthrough in this cultivation. And that was the reason for his sudden seclusion in the Deep Sea Royal Hall. In fact, the news that the Devil Master might achieve a breakthrough had sent waves of excitement through all of the Devil's hearts. Understood, this Shishin will take his leave. Kang Shishin left, and Kai Wao closed her eyes once more as she focused on the Dragon God realm once again. Kai-na Yinger could sense the deep worry in Kai Wao's heart, so she didn't say a single word to disturb her. The Dragon Monarch's sudden return had caused the situation to become extremely twisted. At this time, Kai Wao suddenly rose up from her seat, the dark devilish aura around her trembling chaotically. Who are those people? She muttered in a dark and solemn voice. The strange aura around Kai Wao caused Kai-na Yinger's heart to sink, and she swiftly stepped forward and said, What happened? Kai Wao raised her head to look at her. After that, she tapped a finger on her forehead and flicked it forward. A strange image immediately floated into existence. This image had come from what Zhou Zuzi's eyes and Kai Wao had used her Nirvana Devil Soul to cast it into an image. The Dragon Monarch's figure was slowly descending from the skies high above them in Zhou Zuzi's eyes. The 5 God Emperors of the Western Divine region were all gathered, and the forces that had assembled there were shocking to behold. However, Zhou Zuzi's eyes were not focused on the Dragon Monarch or the 5 God Emperors. Rather, he was looking at the 5 gray figures standing behind the Dragon Monarch. These figures and the auras they radiated were completely alien to them. It seemed as if they were unwilling to be touched by the light of day, and their entire bodies remained shrouded in those gray robes. Accompanying them was the strongest dragon god, Long Fei. What had utterly shocked Zhou Zuzi, Kai Wao, Kai-na Yinger, the 5 God Emperors of the West, and everyone present was that these 5 figures stood directly between the Dragon Monarch and the Crimson Destruction Dragon God. Through the Nirvana Devil Soul, Kai Wao could clearly feel the changes in Zhou Zuzi's emotions. When Zhou Zuzi's spiritual senses and eyes came into contact with those 5 gray figures, he felt as if 1,000 mountains had collapsed on him. The hands that the 5 God Emperors were raising all froze in midair, and they had even forgotten to greet the Dragon Monarch in their extreme shock. Who are those people? Kai Wao muttered again. Kai-na Yinger shook her head with a grim look on her face, and Kai Wao's next few words fell on them like meteors from heaven. The five figures are radiating the draconic energy that is unique to the dragon god race. Furthermore, their auras are not the least bit inferior to the Crimson Destruction dragon gods. Xianxia Yinger swiveled around, the look on her jade face dramatically changed. She cried out in shock, "What did you just say?" Longfei was the strongest dragon god in the dragon god realm, the dreadful being that surpassed both Xianxia Fanchen and Nan Wansheng. He was the person second only to the dragon monarch in this universe. However, those five foreign figures which seemed to appear out of thin air were actually all at least his equal or better. 1. This wasn't something that the dragon monarch had blasted off Xianxia in their brief, but violent confrontation. It was actually part of the clothes that Yun Qi tore apart on a regular basis. He Ling had quietly and dutifully gathered these ripped clothes and deposited them in a spot that wasn't easily seen. Some mysterious person picked a strip of it up when they investigated the forbidden land of Samsara. At this moment, I would like to make a proposal to deduct He Ling's salary. 2. It isn't possible for 5 such people to exist in this world right now. It would be impossible even for the dragon god realm. Xianxia Yinger's golden brows knitted tightly together, even after she heard Kai Wao's words, and saw the 5 robed beings stand in front of the Crimson Destruction dragon god. She was still unable to bring herself to believe what she was seeing. To be more accurate, she simply could not accept it. If this was really true, then the dragon god realm's true strength was so dreadful that it was enough to send them into despair. She swiftly focused and sent out a sound transmission. 2 white figures swiftly flew over as Xianxia Wugu and Xianxia Bingzhu appeared before them. "We received the God Emperor's urgent summons. What instructions do you have for us?" Xianxia Bingzhu asked. "Those 5 figures shrouded in robes, do you have any impression of them?" Xianxia Yinger pointed at the gray figures in the image. Before Xianxia Yinger had even asked the question, the 2 ancestors of the Brahma monarch had already focused their gazes on the 5 people standing behind the dragon monarch. Even if it was only an image, these 2 old men, who had ostensibly seen and experienced everything there was to see and experience in this world, still felt an incredible amount of pressure radiating from those 5 figures. "I do not recognize them," Xianxia Wugu said with a shake of his head. "And not recognizing them is the most terrifying thing of all," Xianxia Bingzhu said. "Even though I am only looking at them through an image, I cannot measure the depth of those 5 hooded figures," Xianxia Wugu said with a deep sigh. "Our ancestor said this. The dragon god realm is far more frightening than they appear to be. The truth of these words is ringing loudly in my ears right now." Xianxia Wugu and Xianxia Bingzhu's words had undoubtedly shattered Xianxia Yinger's final hopes. 5 monsters that were comparable to the Crimson Destruction dragon god. Just these 5 people alone were enough to destroy most of the king realms in existence. The Crimson Destruction dragon god was the person who had nearly become the next dragon monarch. And now the dragon god realm had suddenly produced 5 other people who had the power and qualifications to contend for the rulership of the dragon god realm. Xianxia Yinger's heart had been thrown into complete disarray, and Kai Waya wasn't faring much better. This sudden change in the circumstances meant that the dragon god realm now possessed the power to utterly crush them, and that was before they counted the power of the 5 king realms of the West. Kai Wao's eyes narrowed before she spoke in a slow and unhurried manner. "It's good that we managed to discover the existence of these 5 old monsters far in advance. If not, meeting them in battle without any forewarning would have been unimaginably disastrous." "Do we retreat?" Xianxia Yinger asked. They had the option to flee back to the northern divine region, a perfect refuge that even 10 dragon god realms would not be able to force their way into. Kai Waya pondered that question for a moment before she replied, "We should let the Devil Master decide whether we should retreat or fight. Currently, the biggest variable on our side is him. We'll need to see what sort of surprise he gives us after he emerges from the eternal Heaven-Defying realm. If this surprise doesn't exceed the surprise that the dragon god realm has already given us, we will have no choice but to retreat." "HMPH. Do you think he will be willing to?" Xianxia Yinger said with a soft snort. "He wouldn't in the past, but now." As she thought of Yun Qi's sudden change, even the somber Kai Waya couldn't help but chuckle. He might very well listen. Such a huge assembly of forces will need at least 4 days to travel from the dragon god realm to this place, even if they have the fastest profound ships traveling at maximum speed, Xianxia Yinger said as she started to regain her composure. "Yun Qi will probably come out in 2 days, so even though the timeline is a little tight, we will still have just enough time to retreat if we have to." However, we should give the order to prepare to retreat first, so that we can deal with any other variables we have not foreseen. Kai Weiao fell into a deep and contemplative silence before she gave a curt nod of her head. Long Bai's early return to the Dragon God realm and his unimaginably forceful and ruthless command had already given Kai Weiao a lot of pressure. But it had not been enough for her to consider retreating. However, the sudden appearance of these 5 old monsters had instantly eradicated all of their hopes and beliefs. Even the most exquisite plans and strategies were nothing more than bad jokes in the face of absolute power. Hua Jin sent a sound transmission to the heavenly wolf star god, Yan Xianxia, Fen Deaki, all the assembled higher realm kings, and Kang Shishan. Give them orders to immediately, RUMBLE. A huge rumbling noise rang out. A sound that was reminiscent of a huge landmass cracking apart. Violent tremors immediately shook Zhou Yuzi's soul. And both Kai Weiao and Kaianai Yinger turned back to look at the broadcast image in shock. A gigantic shadow had slowly started to rise up from the ground. And it was only after they changed the angle from which Zhou Yuzi was looking at the shadow that they could clearly see what that gigantic silhouette was. It was actually a huge floating island that stretched nearly 200 kilometers long. No, to be more exact, it was a floating city. A faint grayish-white light seemed to emanate from the buildings that milled on top of it. Every brick, roof tile, and piece of profound jade was also radiating an extremely dense, an ancient aura, an aura so ancient that Zhou Yuzi, an old man himself, could not find any trace of it even in the memories of his founding ancestor. What is that? Kaianai Wugu breathed. It was an existence that even he was unaware of. The 2 previous Brahma heaven god emperors once again recognized how shallow their knowledge of the dragon god realm truly was. Could it be a special kind of profound ship? Kai Weiao's devilish eyes grew sharp and focused as she said those words in a low voice. A profound ship! Kaianai Yinger was just about to disagree with her, but she immediately understood why Kai Weiao had made such a guess. Given the fact that he had gathered the forces of all the king realms together, it was most likely that this was a profound ship, no matter how little it resembled one. Dragon Monarch, who are these seniors? Zhou Yuzi was finally unable to suppress the shock in his heart, so he voiced the question that everyone was dying to ask. Long Bai didn't even glance at him as he replied, "These are the 5 venerable guardians of my race. They are also this dragon's predecessors. Please do not ask anything else." The predecessors of the Dragon Monarch. Those few words had caused the shock in everyone's heart to explosively multiply. The more they thought about it, the more shocked and frightened they grew. Zhou Yuzi made a simple bow. The eternal heaven's unfilial son, Zhou Yuzi greets the senior dragon gods. With the 5 venerable ones leading us, the devil race will be like a candle that can be easily snuffed. The silent venerable withered dragons finally showed a reaction when they heard the words, eternal heaven. Their gazes swept across Zhou Yuzi before long he gave a soft sigh and said, "The lass who created the eternal heaven god realm was such a breathtaking talent. To think that her descendants would fall so far." Zhou Yuzi's head jerked up and shock rippled in his eyes. He had actually called the eternal heaven great ancestor. Alas! These words had not only shocked Zhou Yuzi, they had also shocked Kai Weiao and Kaianai Yinger who were spying on them from the south. This regal bearing, tone, and those words, Kaianai Wugu said, these people might very well be the dragon monarchs or dragon gods of old. To think that the dragon god race was holding such an ace up their sleeve. Terrifying, terrifying, Kaianai Bingzhu said. Given their enormous strength, it really doesn't matter what status they used to hold. Kai Weiao's eyes remained fixed on the gigantic floating city in the image. What I am most concerned about is this strange city. What exactly is it? The moment this floating city appeared, the violent unease in her heart instantly multiplied. It far exceeded the unease she felt when those 5 dreadful old ones had first appeared. She could not even concentrate on continuing the orders that she was about to give Hua Jin. Long Bai calmly surveyed the forces assembled before him as his voice shook the air. I thank the gathered god emperors for sparing no effort in rushing over here. The disaster from the north has engulfed both the eastern and southern regions, and it is something even the heavens and earth cannot tolerate. Hence, I will have to trouble all of you to war alongside me in order to remove this threat. The Qilin Emperor bowed slightly as he said, How could we dare disobey the command of the Dragon Monarch? The Kai Dragon Emperor took a big step forward, and his voice was even louder than the Qilin Emperor's. Exterminating the devil race is the solemn duty of our race. My Emperor Kai realm has long been prepared for it. We were merely awaiting the Dragon Monarch's return and command. Even if I die after this, I will not have a single regret." "That's right," the Hui Dragon Emperor yelled. "My Hui Dragon realm has also been preparing for this day. Once we received the Dragon Monarch's command, all of the divine masters in the Hui Dragon realm were raring to go. Every single one of us has assembled here today without question. With the Dragon Monarch leading the charge, we will definitely wash that cursed devil race in a sea of their own blood." The attitudes and sentiments of the 5 king realms of the Western Divine region had clearly changed. The Ash Dragon God's death and the Crimson Destruction Dragon God's pathetic defeat had caused the 5 king realms to question the invincible aura of the Dragon God realm. As a result, they would handle any given task with trepidation while working to preserve their strength in secret. However, no one had guessed that the Dragon Monarch would give such an unprecedentedly tyrannical command on his return, one that quashed all thoughts of self-preservation. As such, they had all arrived in the Dragon God domain with hearts filled with apprehension. But when they saw the full array of the Dragon God realm's forces assembled before them, all of their previous fears of the devil race and their previous thoughts questioning the invincibility of the Dragon God realm vanished like smoke. The Dragon Monarch was personally taking charge of this battle, and all of the Dragon Gods, Dragon Sovereigns, and Master Dragons had been fully mobilized. Furthermore, he had even produced 5 of the most dreadful old monsters in existence to aid them. This was before even accounting for the core divine masters of their 5 king realms. With such a grand array of forces, what did they have to fear from the devils of the north? Some of them felt like this wouldn't even result in a terrible battle. They would sweep in and smash them to bits like a wave smashing apart a sandcastle. On the other hand, the only wild card that the devils had was the devil master Xianxia, a being who had always defied the bounds of logic and reason. However, the 5 hidden monsters of the Dragon God realm were just as big of a trump card. Their attitudes naturally went through an adjustment due to this new factor. The Dragon Monarch raised a hand to quiet the God Emperors before he continued. "This dragon is greatly comforted by your ardent fervor to rid the world of the devil race. As all of you are divine masters who stand at the peak of the known universe, there is no need for this dragon to waste any more time speaking. Since everyone is present, please move into the world Dragon City. After that, we will travel straight to the 10 Directions Deep Sea Realm, the place where the devil race has gathered all of their forces." "The world Dragon City?" the Killin Emperor mumbled. He seemed to recognize the name from somewhere, but he simply couldn't recall it at the moment. "This is..." The Blue Dragon Emperor stared at the floating city. The Dragon Monarch had just told them to move into the world Dragon City. Could this floating city truly be some sort of special profound ship? The Dragon Monarch calmly said, "This is the divine ship that the Dragon God's ancient ancestors left to us. We can use this ship to travel straight to the southern region's 10 Directions Deep Sea Realm, and we will only need 2 hours to get there." Rumble. After that, the image violently shook and collapsed. "This is impossible," Kaina Yinger said as her pupils shrunk to dots. She strongly voiced her disbelief. "The fastest profound ship in the Western Divine region is the Blue Dragon Realm's Tranquil Heart Temple, and its maximum speed is about the same as the fastest profound ship in the Eastern Divine region, the Vanishing Moon Celestial Palace. Whether it is the Tranquil Heart Temple or the Vanishing Celestial Palace, they will still need at least 3 days to get here from the Dragon God realm, even at their fastest speed. Furthermore, there is no way that this huge profound ship can keep up with those profound arcs which were built for extreme speed. 2 hours, that is simply preposterous." "No." Kai Waiao breathed a long sigh as she spoke in an unhurried but lifeless manner. Now that he is addressing all of the forces of the king realms of the West, there is no way that the Dragon Monarch would lie. Furthermore, the name World Dragon City does exist in the fragments of memory contained within the devil's soul I inherited. If not for that, she wouldn't have become so flustered that she would be unable to maintain that image. Qian Yinger stared at her. "What is that thing?" Kai Waiao replied, "The spirit world of heaven and earth and the world Dragon City, those are the names of 2 special profound ships that existed since the ancient era of the gods. They were both also imbued with the power of the world piercer. In fact, you've already seen the spirit world of heaven and earth before." Kaina Yinger's brow furrowed before she exclaimed, "Could it be Xianxia's primordial profound arc?" "That's right," Kai Waiao said with a nod of her head. Even though it consumes a ridiculous amount of energy, you've personally witnessed the might of the spirit world of heaven and earth. We relied on its very power to easily slip into the heart of the eternal heaven god realm and launch our assault. Meanwhile, this world dragon city, in the memories of my devil soul, it did indeed belong to the dragon god race. But who would have thought that it was not destroyed in that terrible battle all those years ago, and had actually survived to the present? Kai Wao's tone grew more somber with each word. It is a profound ship on the same level as the primordial profound arc, so even if you told me that it would only take an instant to reach here if it had enough resources, I would still believe you. Much less the 2 hours that the Dragon Monarch had just proclaimed. Kainai Yinger's golden pupils shrank even further. 2 hours. The Western Divine Region would be able to launch their attack in 2 hours. Kainai Wugu and Kainai Bingju had been quietly soaking up everything on the sidelines. The moment they heard that, both of them immediately said, "Let's retreat." The core of their forces, the Devil Master, wasn't around, and the other side had not only gathered all of their core forces, they had even produced 5 old monsters out of thin air. The Devils had absolutely no chance of winning this battle. To make matters worse, they only had 2 hours to retreat. It was very clear that the Dragon Monarch had assembled the greatest possible force he could muster so that he could ruthlessly cut off all of the Devil race's escape routes. He was determined to exterminate them. If Kai Wao hadn't been able to secretly hijack Zhou Zuzi's soul in the first place, they wouldn't even have had these 2 hours. The people of the world would only perceive the extreme lengths that Long Bai had taken to be his ruthlessness in dealing with the Devil race. No one would ever believe that this had really originated from his personal hatred of Yun Qi. He wanted to drive Yun Qi into ultimate despair and the most terrible of endings. "No, we can't," Kainai Yinger said in a dark and cold voice as her brow dramatically sank. "If we retreat, what's going to happen to Yun Qi?" The Eternal Heaven Pearl was currently in the midst of maintaining the opened Eternal Heaven Divine Realm. It could not be carelessly moved around. If the Devil race were to retreat, then would they simply leave the Eternal Heaven Pearl and Yun Qi and Shui Meiyan along with it in the 10 Directions Deep Sea Realm? If we retreat, we will still have life and hope. If we defend, Kai Wao paused for a long time before she whispered, "How long can we truly defend for?" Given the timeline that Yun Qi had given them, he would need about 2 more days to emerge from the Eternal Heaven Divine Realm. However, the full might of the Western Divine Region would descend upon them in 2 hours. If they retreated, they could indeed preserve their lives and future. Retreating in a spread-out manner would mean that they would preserve a good part of their forces even if the Western Divine Region gave chase. Furthermore, once they escaped back to the Northern Divine Region, nothing would be able to threaten them any further. But this choice was equivalent to abandoning Yun Qi. However, choosing to stubbornly defend this position. Unless a miracle occurred, the best-case scenario would be the decimation of their forces, and the worst-case scenario would be complete annihilation. Moreover, it didn't seem possible for them to buy enough time for Yun Qi until he could emerge from the Eternal Heaven Divine Realm. Kainai Yinger's hand suddenly shot out to grab Kai Wao's shoulder, her fingers forcefully tightening. "Kai Wao." This was the first time Kainai Yinger had ever spoken to Kai Wao in such a darkly vicious voice, and her eyes were also gleaming with a shockingly dark malice. "I don't care what you are thinking about right now, but you had better understand my position first. Yun Qi has to survive, even if all your people from the Northern Divine Region have to die to ensure that." Her trembling fingers tightened their grip even further. "You're someone who is most adept at stirring up the hearts and minds of the people, so I believe that you can definitely think of a way to get everyone to sell their lives for Yun Qi, even in this desperate situation. You must. Do not talk to me about logic or rationality right now, and do not make me hate you." Kai Wao turned to give Kainai Yinger a deep look, but she did not shake off the fingers that violently gripped her shoulder. "I'm not as capable as you make me out to be. Furthermore, I won't need to stir up anyone's hearts and minds regarding this matter." In the end, she was still the Devil Queen, and she had already fully regained her composure by now. As she stared at Kainai Yinger, her pitch-black eyes had once more transformed into bottomless, soul-devouring abysses which could swallow up everything. "If you want to choose to stay and defend this position, advocate leaving first," she whispered. Kainai Yinger's golden eyes rippled, and the hand which had fiercely grabbed Kai Wao's shoulder started to relax its grip.